Hello, I'm here today to talk to you about Fire Emblem Three Houses. If you're not familiar, Fire Emblem Three Houses is a video game published by Nintendo of the Nintendo Switch. It came out in the summer of 2019. I played this game mostly in early 2020, late 2019, so I came to it a little bit late. But I came to talk to you today because I was really engaged by this game. I love this game. I didn't come here to criticize, or well, maybe criticize a little bit. I came here because I just had to share the story that goes down in this game. It succeeds in telling a narrative that's very much only in video games, because choice is a massive part of it, and because of that, you can get different stories. Many different stories are available in here depending on how you played the game. One thing in particular makes it really important how the story plays out. But I guess we don't need to get into that just yet. And for those who aren't familiar, the Fire Emblem series has been going on for decades now at Nintendo, but only more recently did they come to the US. They were Japan only for some time. And this is actually my first Fire Emblem game. I had not played the series before. From what I had known about the series, there was lots of choice involved and things you can do to really help engage you into the game. But this was my first time playing, was Fire Emblem Three Houses. And I guess there's a couple things to set out before we really get into the meat of the matter. This game is set up as a strategy role-playing game where you command an army, essentially. You move your units around the battlefield, and you try to win battles. That's not going to be super important to this video, but it's really fun, and I really enjoyed that a lot. There's a ton of characters in this game, and you can build relationships with most of them, so you really get to know them. You can even get really high, what they call support levels with the characters, and you can marry people at the very end of the game if you have high enough support with them. None of that's going to be very important, but we're going to talk about, we're really going to focus on the main plot or plots of the game. And again, why am I talking about this? Because I was really surprised and pleasantly surprised by how the stories play out here, because you don't get the whole story on any one playthrough of the game. There are so many things that just don't make sense, or are just left unexplained, or you're just so curious about by the time you get through one playthrough of this game, that in my experience, when I rolled the credits the first time, I said, well, I have to play that again, and I have to do different things so I can see why this happened. Why did this story go down? And in that way, I feel like it is quasi-realistic, because, in real life, we never know what other people's motivations are 100%, and we don't know why they do what they do. And the opportunity to learn that in this way was super fun. And so few of my friends play video games, and they're definitely not going to play this one, and they're definitely not going to play it 3.5 times like I did. So sit back, grab yourself some tea, which is appropriate for reasons I won't explain. Let me talk to you about what the hell is going on in Fire Emblem Three Houses. So to begin, I'm going to give a little background about the setting of the game. This is a vaguely feudal European type setting on a continent called Fodland. There's 3 countries that make up the continent, I guess you could say, but they're all kind of ruled under one central church. We'll get to that in a bit. But this is a place where there's, knights on horseback and Pegasus flying around and stuff like that, where there's lords who rule over territories and commoners, I guess, who, just kind of live in that world. So that's kind of where our setting is. You begin the game with an animated cutscene where you see these 2 armies clashing on what's called the Tailtean Plains. So there's a big war going on. all kinds of knights on horseback, and the Pegasus knights flying around, fighting each other. And you see that there is a woman, green-haired woman, who's identified as Saros, seems to be commanding one side, and there's this other big beardy dude with a wacky sword is on the other side. And they fight, and eventually it just comes down to Saros and Beard Guy, and they're fighting each other, and they have a nice little fight. They beat each other up. Saros gets the other hand, disarms the wacky sword from the guy, gets on top of him, brandishes a little dagger, and refers to him as Nemesis, which when I was playing, I was like, is that his name, or is she just calling him that? And she says, do you remember the Red Canyon? And then proceeds to stab him to death, which is a heck of a way to kick off a Nintendo published game. But there we are. And then things sort of like there's a little bit of flashy light show, and we go to a young girl. She seems to be young, in some like fancy dress, long green hair, like pointy ears, like Zelda type, but even more. And she starts talking to you as the player. And this is where you set up the main character of the game, because you find out this is all happening in their dream. Our main character, the character you play as, is named Byleth. And so I'll just tell you now, Byleth can be male or female. So you can pick them out. You can pick their name also. You can be whatever you want. But Byleth is the default name in English, so we're going to say Byleth. Also, I'll just say here, I always played as boy Byleth, so I might call Byleth he. Just know when I mean Byleth, it's just Byleth. It can be anybody. So you make Byleth, and you're talking to the little girl. It turns out that she doesn't really know who she is or what's going on, but you meet up with her and you're like, oh, great, we'll just talk. Turns out you have the same birth date, no matter what birth date you pick. But eventually it's like time to wake up, and you wake up and you find out who you actually are. You are a mercenary named Byleth. Your dad is there. His name is Geralt. And you work together. And it turns out you've been having these dreams about the battle and with the girl for a little while now. It's kind of weird, but it's nothing too concerning. And you're about to go with your dad Geralt off to some mercenary job up in the north, up in the Kingdom of Fargus. We'll talk about that later. And you're about to get going when a couple people run into your camp. And these are the next three most important characters in the game, so we're getting that early. It's Dimitri, Claude, and Edelgard. They run and say, help, we're being attacked by bandits. Could you help us out, please? We had some people helping us, but they ran away. Can you please help us? And you get attacked by bandits. This is where you're introduced to the battle system of the game, a little tutorial level. You fight together, you beat the bandits, or at least it seems like you have. They're led by a guy named Costas, and once the battle part is done, you go into this cutscene where Edelgard is sort of on her own, and Costas sort of gets back up and he runs at her with an axe, and so he's gonna attack her, and so you heroically do the no! You jump in front of Edelgard and you get an axe in the back. Or do you? When that's about to happen, everything kind of freezes and it goes into like negative color, and you go back to the dream space, I guess you can call it, with the little girl. And she's all on you, going like, what are you doing? Like, I am inside of you too, so you're just gonna like let yourself get killed there? What? So she's upset. I think it's at this point that she does tell you her name, because she kind of remembers this point. Her name is Sothis. And Sothis is like, well, I stopped time so you don't get an axe in your back and you don't die. Now what? You eventually come to the conclusion that like, well, if you can stop time, maybe you can turn it back a little bit and maybe we can not get stabbed in the back. And she's like, great idea. Let's do that. What this is doing is introducing a game mechanic that's called the Divine Pulse. And this allows you to turn back time in the battles that you have. It's really helpful, really nice, so if you make a mistake, you don't have to start the whole thing over. And these battles can take like an hour, so super helpful. Great. So Sothis turns back the clock, just like 30 seconds. And we're back in the same thing. Costas is running at Edelgard with the axe, and instead of just diving to save her. This time you actually disarm the axe. Axe goes flying. You save Edelgard again, but this time, like, nobody gets hurt. And you might think that we've just introduced this ability to rewind time. You might think this is going to be super important in the story. It's not. Not at all. This is strictly a gameplay thing. There's exactly one other moment in the entire game where this is actually addressed again. So other than that, you can just kind of forget that this is a thing that can be done. So whatever. So this actually beats the bandits. They run away. And everybody is safe. The trio that you met, Edelgard, Claude, and Dimitri, some people with them finally catch up to him. And you meet Alois. And he's like, oh, good, we made it just in time for everybody else to be beaten. We'll drive off the rest of the bandits or whatnot. And Alois recognizes your dad. It was like, oh, Gerald, here you are. And so we get a little bit of backstory. It turns out that Alois is with this group called the Knights of Saros. And so they're like the army of the church who runs the continent. And it turns out Gerald used to be captain of the Knights of Saros, but he disappeared 20 years ago. And Alois knew him back then. And he's like, well, you look the same as he always did. And like, I work for the Knights now. I'm like in charge of them, I think he is at this point. Everybody gets to talk and we find out what exactly is going on. And it turns out that Edelgard, Claude, and Dimitri, they are all part of the Officers' Academy at Garreg Mach Monastery. Now, Garreg Mach, this is the kind of the central location of the game. It's where you do a lot of time hanging out. It's where you pretty much always are when you're not in a fight. I guess they are being taught how to be military officers, I guess. It's not 100% clear what they learn there, apart from just learning. They're all young adults. They're all around 17, 18, 19. And I guess rich people and some non-rich folk come here to learn things. Whatever. They are the heads of the titular 3 houses, now that we know about. They're each from different regions of the continent. And, they run into you. Alois and Gerald have this reunion. And so Alois is like, well, I found you. Come back to the monastery with us. You just saved these really important kids. Come back to the monastery. Like, we know you're alive now. Like, come back. Like, get reacquainted with everything. And so Gerald's like, fine, we'll do it. He doesn't seem super excited about it, but he's like, we'll go anyway. So, the rest of the game now goes into chapters. There is actually part 1 of the game and a part 2 of the game, and then each kind of, you can call it a level, is divided into chapters, and they're named. So first we get chapter 1, 3 houses. We go to the monastery, and you are, as the player, you're sort of see everything around. You see a lot of the characters. You meet with the head of the church. Her name is Rhea. She's another like tall lady with green hair, kind of like the lady we saw at the beginning. But she's in charge of the church. So Rhea is like the pope of the church. Her sidekick, the guy who works with her, name is Sedith. He does the administrative type stuff. We also meet around this time Sedith's younger sister. Her name is Flane. She also lives there at the monastery. Sedith is very protective of her. And so we meet Rhea. And Rhea has a little conversation with Byleth and Gerald. She's like, oh, Gerald, you're alive. We kind of thought you were dead. You disappeared 20 years ago. Like, we'd really like you to still help here. Why don't you rejoin the Knights? Like, you can be the captain of the Knights of Saros again. And he's like, sure, okay. Again, not super enthusiastic, but he doesn't turn it down. And it turns out that they have a proposition for Byleth also. Because it turns out that they had a teacher who was going to teach at the Officers' Academy, who was with Dimitri and Edelgard and Claude at the beginning. And he just ran away. So now they're like down a teacher and they're going to start the school year. So they're like, hey, you're a mercenary. Why don't you be a teacher here at the school? You can't really not do this because it's the point of the game. So you're like, okay, we'll do it. I should point out, Byleth never talks. Byleth is the silent protagonist type of character. So Byleth never actually speaks. There are times when they technically speak, but you don't really hear them, generally. So you're like, okay, like, I'll do it. Also, at this point, I should point out that Byleth's age is sort of unclear. Byleth appears to be about the same age as the students there, and they think that Byleth is about that old, like maybe in their about 20. But they never say. And the person who you'd think would know this, Gerald, your dad, doesn't say. They mentioned that Byleth's mom died shortly after childbirth of illness, so Byleth's mom isn't in the picture. Gerald isn't super forthcoming with information, weirdly. Also, talking about Gerald's parenting styles, Byleth doesn't seem to know anything about the Church of Seiros, which is kind of weird because the entire continent that you live on is under the rule, really, of the Church. So they really don't know anything. But this is convenient for us as the player, as we get to actually learn about the church and what goes on there. And so you get to walk around a little bit of the monastery and meet the characters who you're going to be commanding. Again, they're divided into 3 houses. Just to go back a little bit, the continent of Fodlan is divided into 3 countries. In the history of the continent, it was all one country at the beginning, but then they're splits off. So it started with the Adrestian Empire, or the Empire for short. And that's where Edelgard lives in her house. Edelgard is actually next in line to be Emperor of Adrestia, the Adrestian Empire. That's kind of in the south. In the north is the Holy Kingdom of Fargus. Dimitri is from there. Dimitri is the prince there. He's going to be king soon. And to the east is what's called the Leicester Alliance. So the other 2 are sort of royally run. The Leicester Alliance doesn't have a king, but it does have people who run it. It's sort of a bunch of noble houses that are all aligned together, and they don't have a ruling king. Claude, the guy we met, he is going to be the next sovereign duke, is what they call it. So he's going to be in charge of the Leicester Alliance. So it's this really important year here at the Academy because all of the very next rulers of the whole continent, of every country in the continent, are going to school together here at the same time. Convenient. So you go around and you learn about each of their houses. So briefly, the Edelgard's house, the Black Eagles is what they're called. You meet their Edelgard, of course. You have Hubert, Dorothea, Petra, Ferdinand, Linhart, Caspar, and Bernadetta. Those are all the people who you would teach and the units that you'd have you start out. With Dimitri and the Blue Lions, you have Dimitri, then Dedu, Felix, Ash, Sylvain, Mercedes, Annette, and Ingrid. Over on the Golden Deer house, which is the one that Claude is the head of, you have Claude. You have Lorenz, Raphael, Ignatz, Lysithia, Hilda, Marianne, and Leonie. These are all the characters you can get to know. You can actually, if you pick one house, you can recruit people from other houses to come join you. None of them are super important to the plot. So there's actually a ton of story that you can learn between these characters. You learn about their backgrounds, their histories, how they interact with each other as you build support. We're not going to talk about any of that. You can go play the game for that, but that's almost none of it's important to the plot. So if something comes up, we'll circle back to that. So you pick out what house. At this time, you also meet the other 2 teachers who are going to be running the other 2 houses. That's Manuela and Hanneman. So you choose whichever of the 3 houses. And just to fast forward ahead, whichever of the 3 houses you pick influences which second half of the game you get. So you pick that now, and you're going to go with it. Once you pick that, you get a mock battle, just for practice between the 3 houses, so you can get used to playing some more. And of course, Byleth's house wins. Around this time, you also get another cutscene. Once that's done, you get Costas, the bandit from earlier, talks with a new character called the Flame Emperor. He's this guy in a mask, so you don't know who they are. They have like a fun cloak and everything. And it turns out that the Flame Emperor is kind of dressing down Costas for messing up the attack earlier. So it turns out that the Flame Emperor had wanted Costas to attack the house leaders. And you learn that they're mad about this, and essentially they're like, well, now Costas, you screwed this up, so you're going to die. And Costas is like, what? I don't think so. Like, really? But Flame Emperor takes off, like teleports away. Chapter 2, Familiar Scenery. It turns out that now that you're one of the teachers at Garreg one of the things that they do is essentially community service. They take the students out to like help out the country, and every month you get an assignment. And this month's assignment is that there's a bunch of bandits who are hanging out in this canyon called Xanadu, and they need to be routed out. Apparently this can just wait until the end of the month, because the game uses a calendar system, and the important thing almost always happens at the last day of the month, but you learn about it on the first day. So at the end of the month, you go down to do the battle, and you take your class out, and this is your first real battle, your first battle where your students can die. So you go into battle for the first time. It's against the bandits, and what do you know? The bandits are led by Costas. It's the same guy again. So you get to Costas, and this time you kill him. He is dead. It seems that the Flame Emperor's words came true. But the bandits are done. Now, once that's all done, you're kind of standing there in the Red Canyon, Xanadu, and again, Sothis kind of pops into your head and is like, this all is really familiar. I think I used to live here somehow, but there's like nothing there. It's a desolated canyon. But Sothis definitely gets this idea of like, I've been here before, but I don't know how because I don't really have any memory. Chapter 3, Mutiny in the Mist. You come back after your first mission with the bandits, and your next mission is that there is a lord. Again, there's a nobility system going on. There's a lord up in the kingdom of Fargus named Lord Lanato, and apparently he is rallying troops to take on the church, and they can't have that. So you're supposed to go there and sort of clean up. They already sent the knights to go deal with the insurrection, like put them down or stop them at the very least, but you're going to take your class to kind of support them and follow up. That's the idea. This time we meet Catherine, who is another member of the Knights of Saros, and she has like a big old fancy sword, also named Thunderbrand. Has all these spikes on it and has this like glowy stone in it, and it's super strong. Lord Lanato is actually the adopted father of Ash, who's one of the characters you can play. Again, doesn't really come into it, but if you have Ash with you, it's all the more important. So you go up there, and there's a little bit of discussions like, well, why are these people rebelling, and like do we have to like stop them from doing this? I mean, maybe we could like listen to them, but that doesn't get very far because you get to Lord Lanato's forces. There's a fight with them in the mist, the mist of the title, in the fog. You eventually get to Lord Lanato. He's really upset. It turns out that his son, Christoph, I believe, was also against the church years ago, and someone, Catherine, turned him in, and he was executed. So Lanato is pissed at the church and wants to rebel against it. None of this seems to make a lot of sense, but it's happening, so they need to stop it. Oh yeah, by the way, when you got there, the insurrection wasn't as quelled as you thought it would, so you actually have to fight Lanato. You do it, you get to him, Catherine's in the cutscene actually kills him, and everybody's really kind of bothered by this because, before you were fighting bandits, and, sometimes when you go on these missions, you're fighting people who are, like mercenaries. But these were the people who you fought here were just regular people. They were citizens that Lanato kind of rallied to his side, and everybody's really kind of upset that they had to kill these people. Once that's done, they search Lanato's body, and they find this letter, and there's this letter about an assassination plot against Rhea, again, the head of the church. And they're like, some people are like, this is kind of weird and it's kind of convenient, but this is an assassination plan right here, so we got to take it seriously, so we better do something about it. Chapter 4, The Goddess's Rite of Rebirth. So we have this assassination plot that we just discovered, and this is extra important because there's a holy event coming up in the church called the Goddess's Rite of Rebirth. And so this means there's going to be a ton of people coming to the monastery to do this like holiday. That's when the assassination is planned for, so everything is going to be stretched thin as it is, so it's a bad time for this to be happening. I'm going to take a detour here and kind of explain the religion of the Church of Seiros briefly. In the history of Fodland, we had the goddess, who's like the big supreme goddess, come down to Fodland long time ago. Met with the people there and was like, here, let me give you all of this goodness and we'll bless the land. These were like the chosen people by the goddess. And everything was good. But then eventually there was some evil gods from the north who came down and tried to wreck everything. So to fight against them, the goddess gave some people powers. These people specifically were a guy known as the Liberation King, Nemesis, and people called the 10 Elites. And she did this in two ways. She like gave them superpowers and also gave them weapons called relics. It's like super powerful weapons. And they used those to beat the evil gods from the north, and everything was cool. But eventually, Nemesis and the 10 Elites were corrupted by the power that they got, and they were like, well, we're going to fight the goddess now. We're better than the goddess. And so they started a war against the goddess. And it was Saint Seiros, I remember her from the beginning, who led the fight against them. And she beat them and got rid of them. Or at least took them down. Nemesis was killed, and the 10 Elites were stopped. But this is where crests came from. Nemesis and the 10 Elites had these superpowers given to them, remember that? They got that by way of crests. And crests are like these things that like live in people's blood and gives them extra abilities, like superpowers essentially. And the 10 Elites actually, before they were defeated, passed these down. And so like their children also had crests. And these crests are actually the basis of the nobility in Fodland. So like the people with crests are the nobles. And they kind of run everything. The people without them are essentially, their subjects. I don't think it's 100% like every noble has a crest, but most of them do. They're based that way. And they're familial. They're passed down, but it's not 100% like they definitely have crests. Some children are born to people with crests who don't have crests, or vice versa sometimes. Or like if the crest can disappear from the line for a little bit and then come back. And this is really important to the nobility system. And the relics that the 10 Elites used, those are also passed down through these like super powerful weapons that people have. Remember Catherine, her Thunderbrand sword is one of those ancient relics, is what they're called. And Catherine has a crest. Going back a minute, Hanneman, the other teacher, he studies these crests. He asks like Byleth right away, like, hey, can I test you for crests? To see if you have one. Because you don't know. You've been living out as a mercenary in the forest with your dad for your whole life. And he actually does do a test for you, and the results are like inconclusive. It's like, you definitely have a crest, but I don't know what it is. And that's wild because we've been studying these for 1,000 years and we thought we knew all of them, but I guess we don't. There's like one here that we don't know. Bringing this back to the goddess's rite of rebirth, this is like the day that the goddess is supposed to come back, because the goddess, like, she just left Fodland at one point and she went up to like a star that you can see. And the goddess's rite of rebirth is something that they do every year to like, oh, maybe the goddess will come back and like everything will be great again. And so again, there's this assassination plot that's been discovered. They've heightened security everywhere, but there's going to be a zillion people there, impossible to keep track of everybody. Byleth's class is tasked with, pound the pavement, doing as much investigation as we can, figure out like how they're going to attack and why. And like it's pretty quickly decided that this assassination plot doesn't make any sense. and that they're really coming for something else, like if they're coming at all. Through the month, you sort of try to figure out what they're doing, and you figure out that, like, okay, what are they going to do on the Goddess Rite of Rebirth? They're going to open up the Holy Tomb where the goddess's body is resting, I think. It's the goddess or Saros. Anyway, they're going to go into that tomb, which is normally sealed off all the time for this rite. So this is the only thing that's going on different on this day. So they must be attacking the Holy Tomb. So let's be ready for that. And sure enough, they attack the Holy Tomb. The exact thing that you thought would happen happens. And they're able to get down there because, again, the forces are stretched so thin. But luckily, Byleth and their class is there to stop them. So you have this fight down the Holy Tomb. They're trying to unseal the coffin. They don't really know what they're doing. They're just attacking the tomb. You go through the battle, and there's like one guy who's left there, and he does it. He manages to open up the tomb. You think they're going to find a body in there, but they don't. They find a sword. You know, it looks like one of the relics. It doesn't have the stone that Catherine's has, but it looks like it. And if you're paying attention, it looks a lot like the sword that the beard guy at the beginning of the game, the guy they called Nemesis, had. The guy who attacks it tries to use sword, doesn't work. Byleth gets it instead. And it works. It gets all glowy and stuff. And it's able to like break through the magic and, you know, kill the dude. So it's like super strong relic. And so they're like, wow, you can use this thing. And Rhea is like really pleased about this. So he's like, you can have that. Like that can be yours now. And Cidered is pissed because she's like, what? Like we don't even know this guy. And you're giving him this relic, which it turns out is called the Sword of the Creator. It's the sword that was given to Nemesis, you know, that he used. And Cidered is like, we can't give that to them. Like, we don't know who they are. Like, they're not trustworthy. You're here, like, Flame's here, too. Like, this is too dangerous. We shouldn't be doing this. And Rhea is like, no, trust me. Like, it'll be fine. Like, the sword chose Byleth, so everything will be just fine. I believe in it. And so this is where Hanuman comes back in. So remember, Hanuman was testing Byleth for their crest, you know, to see what it was. And he's like, I have an idea now that all this happened. It's like, I think you have the Crest of Flames. Almost like a Fire Emblem. So the Crest of Flames is not something that exists out in the wild. Like, other people don't have the Crest of Flames. Like, the Crest of Flames is something that Nemesis had. But Nemesis didn't have any family. He didn't have any children to pass it on. So the fact that you have it is crazy, but it makes the most sense because you can use the sword. And you can use the sword without the crest stone, because apparently the swords need to have the stones in them, like Catherine's does, or they don't work. And the fact that you can do that, like, it means you must have the Crest of Flames. I don't know, they don't know what that means, but, like, that's what it is. And now you have this Sword of the Creator that's super duper powerful. So, now you have the Sword of the Creator, and things have changed quite a bit. Like, you've become really important. So you can imagine the story is about to pop off from here. But before we get to that, we have a side story to talk about. So remember, this is a video game, and so there is DLC, or downloadable content. And one of the things that you got with the DLC was a side story. This is called Cindered Shadows. Briefly, I had watched some playthroughs of the game, you know, while I was watching it on YouTube. I watched other people playing it, and I saw one person comment that, I wish there was an anime of this game, to which my response at home was, we're playing it right now. Like, this is an anime of this story. The way I kind of took Cindered Shadows is, do you know when they do an anime series, when they make a movie, and the movie is sort of canonical, but it isn't really, but it could be, but it isn't? That's what Cindered Shadows is like. This is literally a side story. It doesn't slot into the main game. You could do it on its own without playing the main game at all, but the story can definitely fit into the main story. The only indicator of like when it would happen is after you get the Sword of the Creator. I'm choosing to talk about it now, but really it can fall just about anywhere in the first half of the game after this point. So I thought, why not just discuss it now? And why discuss it at all? Because you do learn some interesting things during the course of this that become somewhat important later on. And it's just some more wild story to share with you, so why not? So Cindered Shadows, Chapter 1, The Fourth House. So it starts out with a story, more backstory about the Church of Saros and the religion. So it turns out that not long after they established the church, Saros, her and this group called the Four Apostles, they tried to bring the goddess back to life. Again, remember, that's something that they sort of wish for all the time, but they actively tried to do it at one point. And they had this magic chalice called the Chalice of Beginnings, and they did this ceremony to try to bring the goddess back, but it didn't work. The four apostles are sort of scattered to the winds, and history doesn't really remember them. This is framed in Rhea telling Alois about it, and she also brings up, by the way, did you know that there's a fourth house? And he's like, huh? And so then we cut to, just daily life at Garreg Mach, and Claude has noticed that there's some weird folks sneaking around, and they sort of vanish into the underground of Garreg Mach. And he's like, this is weird, let's check this out. You actually get a mix of playable characters that are not usually possible in the main game. You get Claude, Dimitri, and Edelgard, along with Ash, Hilda, and Linhart, because they all just bring sidekicks along. So you get people from every house. You catch one of these guys and you decide to follow them. And you go down and you run into these four main characters. So it's Yuri, Balthus, Happy, and Constance. They have school-ish uniforms. You initially start a fight with them. Hilda actually mentions one of those guys looks kind of familiar to me. But you do have a fight, and you win the fight. And then afterwards, they're talking a little bit more, and Hilda's like, oh, I remember you, Balthus? You're my brother's friend. I know you. And you're like, it took you this long to remember that? Yeah, it turns out that Balthus used to go to the Officers Academy with Hilda's older brother, Holst. They actually knew each other when they were younger. And so this sort of opens up things. They get to explaining what's going on. And what's going on is there's this essentially secret town that's underneath Garreg Mach Monastery. It's called Abyss. And Abyss is sort of the place where the undesirable of the world end up. It has been set up as kind of a sanctuary for people who the church doesn't want around, but doesn't want to just kill. So they're you can go live right underneath our noses, literally. Balthus is there because apparently he racked up a whole bunch of debt back in the Alliance, and so he has to go hide because there's bounty hunters after him all the time. You find out that Yuri is the leader of a gang, and for reasons needs to hide out. Happy, it turns out, has an interesting power where if she sighs, sighs, it causes monsters to appear. They just show up and start attacking things. So she's viewed as a menace, and so she has to hide away. And Constance used to live in the Empire, but there was a war a little while ago. There was a war with these other countries called Dagda and Brigid. Brigid is where Petra's from. There was a war with them, and during that war, she lost her entire house, her whole standing, because she was part of a noble house. So she just has nothing, and she wants to rebuild it, but she has no resources also. She's there. Those four have a little kind of school called the Ashen Wolves. So there's the Golden Deer, Blue Lions, Black Eagles. They've called themselves the Ashen Wolves. And so they live in Abyss, and they're kind of the caretakers of it. Trying to make sure everything works well. And the reason they attacked you is because there have been some attacks on them recently. Some mercenaries have been coming down to Abyss and attacking them, so everybody's a little bit on edge. Chapter 2, What Lies Beneath. So this kind of leads right into there's mercenaries attacking again, and so the wolves ask you for your help. And you're like, sure, we'll help you out. Now we've all made friends, and you go help them out. You go and you run into the mercenaries, you beat them, and then a guy shows up. His name is Elfric. And Elfric is the guy who sort of set up the Ashen Wolves. He's also He is a cardinal, I think, in the church, but all the cardinals' identities are kept secret. He is the guy who's in charge of Abyss. Remember, Abyss is like a church-sanctioned thing. Like, Rhea knows about it, and I guess the other cardinals know about it, but it's kept secret from the world at large. And so he's kind of in charge of it. So he is trying to take care of the people who are living there. He is like the Secretary of Abyss, if we're talking in government terms. So he shows up and he's like, oh, good, glad everybody's okay. Like, he actually, like, somebody attacks Yuri again, and so he stops that from going down. So he sort of swoops in and is like, oh, hey. And he knows Byleth. He's like, oh, yeah, totally. You know, I'm up on the surface also. Like, I'm a cardinal. Like, you don't know that, but I'm a cardinal. I've seen, like, what's been going on there. And actually, you know what? I know your parents. And so you're like, oh, really? Yeah, totally. Like, when Geralt was here at the monastery, I knew him, and I also knew your mother really well. I was friends with them. And he's like, I'm happy to tell you all about it. Good, somebody's going to tell me something. Because, as a side note, Geralt is not very talkative about anything. Like, to the point where you actually don't know how old Geralt is. And, like, he doesn't say, and he claims not to know. There's a little bit of dialogue with him and Leonie, who is, like, his number one fan, where they're talking about, like, Geralt doesn't know how old he is. He doesn't admit how old Byleth is. He also claims not to know how old he is himself, which is weird. He says at one point, like, at a certain point, you just stop counting, which would imply that he's very old, that he just stopped counting how old he was. Other way, he doesn't talk about anything. So the fact that Aelfric can actually tell you something about your family is wild and good and crazy. So you're like, all right, let's work with Aelfric. Chapter 3, The Rite of Rising. Byleth and Aelfric actually get to talk. And Aelfric actually gives you the information. And this is the only place where you learn Byleth's mother's name. Up in the main game, eventually you go to a graveyard and see Geralt's there. And you find out, like, this grave here, where you can't see the name, that's your mom. Like, that's where your mother's buried. Which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense with what Geralt told you about when your mother died. But he is like, oh, I'll tell you more later. Aelfric actually tells you a thing or two. So your mom's name is Citri. And Citri was a nun at the monastery. She was really close with Aelfric. And then, you know, she met Geralt. And they got married. There was all this talk that Citri was always kind of frail, so she, like, never left the monastery, which is kind of strange. You do learn that they were a couple there. And Aelfric does seem to know that Byleth is Citri's child, whereas that is not super well known. So you learn a little bit about your parentage, because your dad won't talk to you about it. So in exchange for, like, teaching you stuff, Aelfric asks you, hey, can you actually teach the Ashen Wolves? Can you actually teach them about stuff? Be like you are doing up at the top, down here, like, help them out. And you're like, sure, no problem. And so the mercenaries continue to be a problem. And they start to figure out that, like, well, they're coming down to Abyss for something. And somebody floats the idea that, like, I think we might know what they're coming for. Because legend has it that there's this item somewhere down here called the Chalice of Beginnings. And, you know, this ties back to the story we heard back at the beginning. And the chalice can do something super good, maybe. Like, they tried to use it to bring back the goddess, so they're probably looking for this. Everybody decides, like, well, that's probably what they're doing. Somebody, again, for whatever reason, they come up with the idea of, like, well, what if we find it? Like, if we find it, then, you know, we can get rid of it or just secure it or keep them from coming to look for it. And Alfred's like, no, don't do that. You know, A, we don't know if this thing is real. And, like, B, like, there's, like, a whole bunch of uncharted areas down here under the monastery. Because apparently the monastery is, like, built on a mountain and just giant. So he's like, don't do that. So you decide to do it anyway. And you venture deep, deep down into Abyss. And you get down into this, like, valley that's, like, way down underneath. And you fight these golems, these, like, they do a lot of good, fun stuff in this game with language, because, like, they don't have the word robot, which is what, like, we might call them. In the game, they're called golems, but when they actually talk about them, they say, like, they're like living dolls. So they call them dolls in the thing, which I think is really fun. But you fight through them, and you get to this place, and there's these what we would recognize as like crest inscriptions on the wall, but they're not like the usual crests that we're used to seeing from all the other characters in the game. But you get to it, and it opens up, and inside, there it is. It's a chalice. It's the chalice of beginnings. It's the thing that you were looking for. You found it. Chapter 4, Danger in the Dark. You got the chalice. You run back. This is where the actual gameplay part of the level comes. It's at the beginning instead of the end, which is fun. You run away from the golems. Some of the mercenaries show up again, but you beat them. But you make it back, and you're safe. And you got the chalice. But unfortunately, you find out that when you got back, the mercenaries kidnapped Elfric. So somehow they knew that you were going to find the chalice, that you did find it, and you made it back. And so they've kidnapped Elfric, and they left a note saying, we'll exchange the chalice for Elfric. And right away, some people figure out, like Linhardt figures out that, like, there's a mole. You know, there's no way they would know any of this happened unless somebody would feed them information. So that's bad. So also around this time, Yuri kind of takes you aside and is like, hey, you want to go out? Like just asks you out, like on a date. And tells you, like, hey, meet up at, this place right at midnight, be there right on time, and yeah, it's on. So you're like, huh, awesome. Chapter 5, Betrayal. Alfred's been kidnapped, right? You decide that, like, hey, we should get the rest of the church involved in this, because even though the ransom note said no cops, said, don't get the church involved, they're like, well, we should. You talk to Rhea about what's going on, and she's like, huh, I see. Like, oh, you found the chalice. Like, that's cool. Yeah, just trade it to him. Because she knows, like, it's not going to work. They did this ceremony where they tried to bring back the goddess. It didn't work. So, whatever they want it for, it's not going to work. So, yeah, just trade it to him. Like, we want to make sure Alfred gets back safe. And so, like, okay, we'll go. And you go to the meet-off. Really, they're just going to try and get both. They're not going to do a trade. They try to get the mercenaries and beat them, and, like, without having to surrender the chalice. That's the idea. And so you go through the battle, and then at the end of the battle, as the chapter foretold, there's betrayal. It turns out that Elfric himself has been behind all of this. And what's more, Yuri is working with him. So Yuri, like, binds everybody with magic. He attacks Byleth, like, doesn't hurt him too bad, but, like, takes him out. And he's like, yeah, like, we were behind this the whole time, so bye. And so they take the chalice. Yuri and Elfric, teleport away, and they also take Happy and Balthus and Constance. They take them all off. And you're like, that sucks. So now we know who the mole was. What do we do now? Because, like, the church is there, all the knights are there. It's like, they're going to do this rite of rebirth. Or not the rite of rebirth. They're going to do this right thing to try to do something. Like, we got to stop them. So, and then you kind of realize in your head, like, wait a minute. Yuri was really sure to ask me out on that date before all this went down. And you get to thinking, like, maybe there's something more going on. They told me to be at, like, this part of the church at this time specifically, like at the stroke of midnight. Like, I think Yuri was trying to tell me something. So, like, let's go. Chapter 6, Return to Me. We go to now Elfric and Yuri in their, like, secret place. And it turns out, yeah, they're going to do that resurrection rite that they tried to do with the chalice to begin with. Like, what are they resurrecting, you might ask? Well, it turns out, remember, Elfric was really close with Citri and Gerald back in the day. So, what it turns out happened is Elfric is in charge of Abyss, right? So he was in charge of making sure everything there was okay. And so he, spent a lot of time down there. So he was poking around in Abyss one day, and he found Citri. Citri, who died, remember, like 20 years ago from when we were playing. But, this was still like several years after she died. And, like, A, there's a grave up on the surface that says her name on it, but he found her body, just, like, randomly down in an abyss. B, her body had not decomposed at all. it was in pristine condition. He was still dead, but her body was still there. So he was kind of understandably really surprised by this. He kind of figured that, well, this must mean that something special about her. What if I could bring her back to life? Because, he really liked her. So this has been his plan for years, it turns out, because all of the Ashen Wolves, they were sort of shepherded down to Abyss by Elfric. And it turns out that they all have crests too, and their crests are the crests of the 4 apostles, from the old story. So the plan is, he figures that, okay, they were using their blood in this ritual to resurrect the goddess back in the day, and the only reason it didn't work is because they didn't use enough blood. How he comes to this conclusion, I don't know. But he's like, well, if I just take all of the blood of all 4 of you, then it must work, and I'll be able to bring Citri back to life. And so the Balthus and Constance and Happy are like, what the hell, Yuri? Like, you're going to die too in this plan. Like, why are you doing this? And he's like, because I'm really a triple agent. And it turns out that Yuri had been working with Rhea all along. At some point, Rhea had sort of gotten wind that Elfric might not be on the up and up. And so she had recruited Yuri to, like, hey, work for me on the sly. And so, because Yuri gave Violet the tip-off, they show up. Elfric is still doing the magic ceremony, but they can't complete it. But I guess he does get some blood from everybody, but not enough. So they beat Elfric. Elfric's like, crap, bye, and he teleports away again. They don't catch him, but they do stop the ceremony. Chapter 7, Wolf Pack. Elfric goes to another location. He's like, well, I think I can still finish this ritual. I don't know why he thinks this, but he's like, well, I'll just use my own blood to fill out the rest of the chalice, and it'll work. It doesn't work. I should point out, when he pieced out, he took himself and the chalice and Citri's body again. And at some point when they're like traveling to this like final location, somebody asks like, how is Citri's body down here? Because Rhea knew Citri pretty well. She was one of the nuns. And you're like, how is her body down there? And Rhea says like, well, like, I love Citri so much that like I couldn't bear to have her just be in the grave. So we did the burial, and then I took her body out, and then I stashed it in Abyss so I could visit it from time to time. And nobody questions this. But that's really weird. Like, really weird. Like, suspiciously weird. Like, why would you do this? Also, why hasn't her body decomposed in 20 years? This does not get examined because there's an emergency going on, but it's weird, isn't it? So they find Elfric again. Elfric tries to do the ceremony again, and shockingly, it fails again. What happens instead is the chalice absorbs Elfric and Citri, and because of magic, they turn into this big giant monster. And so you have to fight Elfric as a big giant monster. You kill him and beat him, and he's gone for good. And also Citri's body seems to be destroyed in the process too. So that's weird and the bummer. But that whole thing has been taken care of. No more mercenaries, no more chalice, no more Elfric. And Rhea says like, hey, all of you Ashen Wolves for helping us out. You don't need to stay here in hiding anymore. You can go off and live, your lives however you want. And so that's how that kind of ends. When you play this, you get the ability to use all those 4 characters in the main story. But again, since they came from the side story, they don't really matter in the overall things. So that's Cindered Shadows. As you can see, it gives you this really interesting bit of information about Byleth's mother. And again, why did Rhea stash this body down in Abyss? Why didn't it decompose? Why did they turn into a big monster at the end? All things that might make a little more sense the more we learn. Chapter 5, The Tower of Black Winds. We're back to the main story at this point. Remember, we just got the Sword of the Creator, but we're just going to continue on as normal, or as normal as things get. So our next assignment, as a class, is there's this guy who runs this bandit group. His name is Miklon. He's actually the brother of Sylvain. And just to explain that a little bit, it turns out that Sylvain comes from a noble family. He has a crest, but Miklon, his older brother, was not born with a crest. And so when Sylvain came along, Miquelon was sort of disinherited and kicked out of the house. And he became a thief, a bandit again. And what has happened is he has stolen the relic from the family. It's called the Lance of Ruin. And he is kind of running roughshod over this place in the kingdom. And so we're sent to stop him and to get that relic back. You also meet either Judith or Rodrigue at this point. They will become more important later on. But you go to this big old tower where they're holed up. You run up to the top of the tower. You have another person joining you from the Knights. His name is Gilbert. Again, we'll talk more about him later. You get through his forces. You get to the top. He's wielding this Lance of Ruin, which makes him like extra strong. But you've been warned that like he probably shouldn't be using this because you need to have a crest in order to use the relics. Like Catherine, like she uses her Thunderbrand and she's fine. Byleth uses the Sword of Creator. They're fine. You get to the point where you fight Miquelon. And things go bad, because apparently if you're using these relics without having a crest, it goes really bad because Miquelon ends up turning what's called a black beast. He turns this big old like monster, walks around on 4 legs, big fangs, nasty. He's just like a big monster. And you fight him and like you eventually end up killing him. And it turns out that then you go back to the monastery and you're like, hey, did you know this was going to happen? You ask Ray, and she's like, yeah, totally. Like, that's what happens. This is why you don't mess with relics. And it's like, you knew that was going to happen? You didn't tell us? And I was like, sure, yeah. So you're like, okay. And it's about this time as well that we catch up with the Flame Emperor again. We get another cutscene. And the Flame Emperor is meeting with this guy identified as Lord Arundel. And essentially they're talking about how when they had the little skirmish at the tomb, like they were trying to get into the tomb and get the remains of Saros, but they didn't, and now Byleth has the Sword of the Creator, and by the way, the Sword of the Creator was there for some reason. And they're like, well, we better keep an eye on that Byleth who's got the Sword of the Creator. But you get the idea that, you know, sinister plans are afoot, and they certainly seem to be behind all those attacks on the tomb. Chapter 6, Rumors of a Reaper. This month starts out interestingly. Flayn, remember Seth's little sister, is kidnapped. She's disappeared, and it's pretty sure that she's been taken by somebody because she only stays within the monastery. Cidered is like beside himself. He's really worried about it. Like he's always been super protective of Flayn because Flayn's like just around the monastery as a character. And so he's always been super protective of her. And so he's losing it that she has gone missing and is presumed kidnapped. So the whole month you're trying to figure out what happened to Flayn, who might have taken her. There's a couple characters who I didn't mention before who are just sort of hanging around. Well, I should bring up now. There's this guy named Yuritsa. He is like the combat instructor at the school. He wears this weird mask. Like it's not like super useful, but he still wears a mask. And he's pretty antagonistic, like in a very weird way. He has this weird way of talking, kind of like this. But he always wants to like fight with Byleth and seems a little interested in maybe killing Byleth. But people like Hubert are also that weird too. There's also Tomas, who is kind of like the librarian of the place. He's around. You can learn stuff from him too. Oh, and there's also Shamir. Shamir showed up a couple chapters before briefly, but now she's sort of in the game more often. Shamir is another member of the Knights of Saros. She's the partner of Catherine, who we met before. You're going around, and the reason I bring this up is because there's a couple of notable things that happen here when you're doing your investigation. If you talk to everyone in the school, Tomas is the only person who didn't already know that Flayn was missing. So that's weird. And Professor Manuela, remember her? She is missing. She's just not on the map this time. And so is Yuritsa, also missing. And eventually you get to the bottom of like, well, maybe we should check out Yuritsa's room, because there's been a few people talking about like they saw somebody with a mask skulking around, and then somebody actually like Manuela like went after Yuritsa, or Manuela was looking for Yuritsa. And so eventually you go to Yuritsa's quarters, and there's Manuela, who has been stabbed. She's like, okay, this looks bad. Interestingly, your house leader, whoever they are, takes Manuela to the infirmary, so they're gone for the next battle. Your house leader's gone. But you find this secret passage in Yuritsa's quarters, and you go down it. It's one of these other underground tunnels that's in Garreg, because apparently there's a lot of that. And you go down there and you find her. You find Flane, and then there's another girl there also. And when you're doing your investigations, you find out that, like, oh yeah, there have been, like, rumors of this Reaper, like this, like, knight with a big scythe who's been, like, wandering around and, like, maybe kidnapping people. And also, about a year ago, like last school year, one of the students went missing and they never found her. And, like, it was sort of assumed that she just sort of left the school, but, like, maybe something else is going on now that Flane's been kidnapped too. So you find Flane and this other, like, mystery girl are both there. Luckily they seem to be alive. But then that Reaper that you're hearing so much about shows up. This guy called the Death Knight. Big spiky armor, skull mask wearing. And so you get into a fight with the Death Knight. You get to the end of the battle, like, you don't actually kill the Death Knight, or you don't even need to even fight the Death Knight. He's super powerful. But then the Flame Emperor shows up. You know, the guy from the cutscenes. The Flame Emperor shows up and is like, no need to fight anymore. Death Knight, get out of here. And the Flame Emperor sort of gives you a little bit of a warning of, like, hey, like, don't mess around too much, like, later, and, you know, teleports away. So, like, well, that was crazy, and I think Professor Yuritsa is the Death Knight because we went through his quarters, but at least we got Flane and I guess this other girl from before, from last school year. Like, they're safe. They're okay. Chapter 7, Field of the Eagle and Lion. So Flane's back, you know, everybody's safe. It turns out the other girl that you found, her name is Monica, and she was part of the Black Eagles last year, and again, she got kidnapped apparently and has been held hostage for an entire year. But she's like, I'm okay, I'm going to rejoin the Black Eagles, and I'm going to, you know, finish out my education. Which seems weird, but she seems to be okay. You don't actually get to play as her, but she's just sort of hanging around the monastery. Seteth is understandably, like, he's really grateful to Byleth, and he's always been really sort of standoffish with Byleth, but, like, now that you saved Flane, he's like, good for you, thank you, like, you've earned my respect now. But he's like, we gotta go, though, because we can't be here anymore because Flane's in danger. And Flane's like, no, like, coming to the monastery, she's loved it. He's like, I don't want to go into hiding here. And she's like, well, what if I join the professor's class? Then she is always there to protect me because they saved me. Maybe I should just join their class. So Seteth is like, okay. And so Flane actually joins, like, whatever class they're in. So there's been an event that's been talked about for a little while. It's called the Battle of Eagle and Lion. It's when the school classes go and they kind of reenact a famous battle that happened at Gronder Field like some years ago. You know, it was like during when there's a war between the various countries, but they just sort of do it for fun now. You go do the battle, your house wins, and at the end of it, they're like, that was really fun. You know, you have a big banquet at the end of it, and, like, you know, everybody from all the houses, you know, just sort of partying, taking it, having a good time this school year. You know, things have gotten back to being better. Chapter 8, The Flame in the Darkness. Again, things are getting better, but they quickly get worse. At the start of this month, you talk to Geralt again. Geralt's been in and out of the story, by the way. Like, he's never with you, but he's like, oh, I have a mission to go do somewhere else. Bye. So Geralt is back, and you're just talking with him, and Byleth just faints. Like, for no good reason. Just like, they're like, are you doing okay? Like, you might want to see the doctor. Manuela's the doctor, by the way. But, like, they just faint. It's like, huh, that's kind of weird. But you start hearing there that there's this village called Remire. Something bad is happening there, like, really bad. Like, they think it's like a plague of some kind. But, like, nobody can... Based on what they're hearing, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, maybe it's magic, maybe it's sickness, it's unclear. But we better go figure it out. So you actually get Geralt to come with you on this mission. So you go to Remire Village, and essentially it's a zombie outbreak. Half of the people in town have, like, gone crazy, and they have, like, you know, whited out eyes and veins popping out, and they're, ah! attacking all the other people in the town. Like, it's on fire. Like, it's really bad. You're like, dang, like we need to help. And so you get into it, and you're trying to subdue the townspeople who've gone crazy. And then Tomas shows up. Remember Tomas? He was the teacher. He was the guy who was like, Flane's missing, when everybody else was out looking for her. So yeah, so he shows up, and it reveals himself, and it turns out he's not Tomas at all. He looks way different. His skin is just white, like he has this like weird eye, and he's like, yeah, my real name's Solon. And yeah, we were doing some experiments with these people, so like, I'm not sure why he decides to reveal himself, but he does, and like, oh, that's messed up. And then the Death Knight appears again, and he's like backing Solon. And so you have to get into another fight with them. Fortunately, you're able to, save some people in the village, subdue them. Like, a ton of people died. It still turns out Solon escapes. A little bit of backstory. Turns out that Tomas had been the librarian for like 40 years, like for a long time. But you do some digging, you find out like, oh, he left the monastery about 10 years ago, but he came back a few years later. But like, he was missing for this kind of length of time. So everybody's like what? Like, was he was a bad guy operating under our noses all this time? Like, that kind of shakes everybody. And when you're cleaning up the remains of Rummeyer village, you start having this conversation with your dad, and Gerald's like, maybe I should tell you some more about your history, your backstory, because there's some weird stuff going on. And then the Flame Emperor shows up again, and the Flame Emperor this time is like, look, I didn't have anything to do with this. He's like, it's true, I do work with that guy, I work with Solon, but like, he didn't tell me he was going to do any of this. So like, this isn't me. He's like, you know what? I'd actually like to stop working with this guy. And actually offers Byleth, hey, you got the Sword of the Creator. Why don't we work together? Like, if we work together, I can like get rid of the Solon guy, and like I can actually like do good things for the world with your help. You refuse. Geralt tries to arrest the Flame Emperor because they know that they're behind the attacks that have been going on, but I guess not behind everything. But the Flame Emperor teleports away before they can arrest him. And so again, you go back to the monastery. It turns like the monastery takes in a lot of the orphans from Rummeyer village because the town's just like gone at this point. They kind of debrief with everything, and Rhea is talking with Byleth, and they're just sort of talking. They're sort of like exchanging pleasantries, and Rhea's like may Sothis like watch over you, and you're like, wait, Sothis? What did you say, Sothis? And he's like, and Rhea's like, yeah, that's actually the goddess's real name is Sothis. Like, you don't like bandy it about. We try to be respectful, but the goddess's name is Sothis. And then Sothis inside of Byleth is like, what? Like, what does that mean? Like, even Sothis, upon hearing this, is sort of like baffled, like, huh? But as the audience, you can kind of put two and two together, like, goddess, I guess. Chapter 9, The Cause of Sorrow. So another big school event is coming up. There's a big ball, a dance. You have a little thing called the White Heron Cup, where there's a dance competition. You have to pick one of your people to be in it. But, it's just for fun. It's kind of like the timing is like Christmas for us. So there's like a little cut scene with people dancing, like Claude like has you come dance with them. So you're kind of wandering around after the ball, and like you hear like Rhea going somewhere, and Sothis like, follow her. Like, we need to kind of figure some of these things out. And you kind of eavesdrop on Rhea kind of singing this song to herself. And Sothis in your head is like, I know that song. I'm not sure how, but I know it. And then eventually she kind of comes around like, I know that song because I wrote it. I wrote that song. How is she singing it? I don't know. Again, some more mystery. So again, like before, Geralt was like, maybe it's about time I explain some things to you, but later. And you get word that there's some monsters have shown up in this area near the monastery. But it's like within the monastery grounds, like, how could the monsters have gotten in? And Geralt is kind of like putting some math together in his head. He's like, this is trouble, like, let's go. And so you go out and you fight these monsters, And it turns out you get there, and the students who are like trapped inside here, some of them are turning into monsters. And so like, dang. So you have to go in, you fight the monsters, you beat them. Like I think it's implied that like they just turn back into students and they're all right, or maybe not. Maybe they died. Anyway, you beat the monsters, and things are cool. When you're in the middle of this battle, though, Monica shows up. Remember Monica, the girl that we rescued? She's like hanging out around the map. She's always like with Edelgard, but you can't do much with her. But Monica shows up. Once the fight's done, you get a cutscene, and Monica's like, "Thanks, Geralt. Thanks for saving me." But then she like sort of skips around her, pulls a knife, and stabs Geralt in the back. And Byleth sees all this happen. And so Byleth is shocked, and here's that point. Remember when I said that the Divine Pulse comes back one time? This is the time. The time you'd hope it was. And Byleth turns back time to like right before that happens. And you see Monica like walk around him and gets the knife. Byleth pulls the Sword of the Creator and like fires it out. I might not have mentioned the Sword of the Creator is like a chain sword, like Ivy from Soul Calibur uses. So Byleth shoots it out, but then somebody else just teleports in and puts up a shield, and that blocks the sword, so you can't stop it. Geralt still gets shanked. Yeah, this other guy has like white skin, like white beard, kind of like Solon, but we've never seen this guy before. So the new guy teleports away and takes Monica with him, I think. And so you like rush over to Geralt like he's been stabbed, but like he's doing really bad, like even worse than you might expect, and Geralt dies. Right before he could explain anything to us. Isn't it always the way? But yeah, so Geralt is dead. And so you get a lot of, mourning and such. Earlier in the game, Geralt had said, like, hey, if anything happens to me, like, find my journal in my quarters and read it. And, like, so you can actually get some of the story. And at this point, you get the chance to do this. And you find out that a lot of the things that have been sort of talked about get fleshed out a little bit. Is that back when Geralt was at the monastery, Byleth's mother, Citri, as we now know, she did die during childbirth, and Geralt had the child, and there was something weird about the child. The baby has a pulse, but has no heartbeat. I don't know exactly how you frame that, but yeah, there's a pulse, but there's no heartbeat, and the child doesn't make any noise, like doesn't cry, nothing. And it, again, should be pointed out that Byleth, they kind of make a joke about the silent protagonist kind of trope that they're using, in that they call Byleth the Ashen Demon, because like they have like no expression. And as a mercenary, they gain this nickname, the Ashen Demon. But yeah, very quiet, like doesn't react to anything, no heartbeat. Geralt is really suspicious about the church and like what might have happened between his wife Citri and the child being born. And so it turns out he fled, and the way he did that is he started a fire in the monastery and like said that the baby died in the fire. He later claimed that Byleth was born after he left the monastery. That's why he was really vague about their age. But it seems maybe that wasn't the case. So Geralt really didn't want to be around the church, it seems, because he did not trust them. And this is sort of borne out in the dialogue, because even from the very beginning of the game, he was like, be wary of Rhea. You can join the monastery, be a teacher. I hope it all goes well, but like, just be careful with Rhea. Chapter 10, Where the Goddess Dwells. Everybody's sad that Geralt died, and they have the knights out looking for the people who did it, because they figure they're the same as who were with Solon, and looking for Monica and whatnot. They find him. There's some stuff going on in a nearby forest, and so they're like, let's go. There's a little bit of talk of like, hey, like don't go crazy, Byleth. Like there's some kind of big plot going on here, and like we'd like to get to the bottom of it. So maybe just don't kill them straight away, and like don't get killed yourself. Rhea is particularly concerned about you putting yourself in danger, but they're like, let's go get him. And so you go and Monica's there, and Monica, she changes herself too, kind of like Solon did, and her real name is Kranya, it seems. And she has the white skin, also like orange hair. and she's really excited about killing you. And so a fight ensues. Crania kind of lures Byleth into this like staging area. It's like this big square, stone square. And Solon shows up again, and he's like, "Got you now." He performs some kind of magic. He calls it like the Curse of Zaharas. He does something with Monica. It's unclear what exactly he does, but it looks like he reaches into her chest and like pulls out her heart or something else and he breaks in his hand, and it causes the spell to activate. Crania's still alive, but she's like also within the realm of the spell turning on, so it's Crania and Byleth. And there's all this like shadow smoke comes up, and they both disappear. They're away. And Solon explains like, yeah, I put this forbidden curse on them, like transport them into the Phantom Zone, and like they're stuck there forever. Like they're not dead probably, but like they can't ever come back. Like that's worse. Then we get to Byleth and Sothis, and they're in like the kind of the dream realm where they talk to each other. And Sothis is like, "Well, really? Like you got us trapped again? Like, do you really need to run headlong into danger? So now we're trapped here like forever. So what the hell?" But Sothis is like, "Well, we can actually do something about this, but like it means I have to go." What she does is she merges with Byleth, as best as I can explain it. She explains beforehand like I can give you all my power because I've had this like time stopping power, but like I will go away. Like I'll still be there, but I won't be like a person you can talk to anymore. And they're like, okay, let's give it a go. And so there's a little cutscene that happens, and they sort of like come together, and Byleth like transforms, like gets all this power. Byleth's hair turns into like a light green color. And then we cut back into the real world. Byleth is able to like cut through the dimension and like comes back and is now like super powered. Crania's gone, I guess. Like we never see her again. She's stuck there forever, I guess. But then the fight ensues. The character you play as is actually like way more powerful. Also can do new attacks. And you finally get to Solon, and Solon is really like, like you shouldn't have been able to break that curse. That must mean ... They don't explain exactly what that means, but Solon seems to know what's up at that point, and Solon's beaten, gets killed. Like your house leader comes running up to you and is like, "Oh my god, you're alive. I thought you're going to be dead." Like you faint at that point again. It's not clear why, but like you're just tired. You just like fall asleep, and it's like, wow, like you've transformed. Like you don't change back. Like your hair is still the green color. And they take you back to the monastery. They get you back. Rhea wakes you up, and Rhea's like super happy about this. And Sedith is a little more like, he knows there's some shenanigans going on. Something has happened here. But Rhea's like, "Oh, this is great. You're like going to be the new emissary of the goddess." And like, just like Saros did, like you'll probably get like a divine message from the goddess. The goddess like did this to you. But Sedith is really concerned. He's like, "You see that hair color? Like something's going on, Rhea, and like something is going on, and you're not telling us. Like you need to explain this." And Rhea to Sedith is like, it's okay, like it'll all be clear soon. I do need to explain some things, but like give me a minute. Like we're gonna do something. Like everything will be fine. Like Rhea's pretty confident things are going well. Chapter 11, Throne of Knowledge. Like we said before, Rhea is kind of pleased as punch about this transformation that's happened. She has an idea. We're going to go down into another underground part of the monastery, because there's a lot of things underground here. And it's this throne. You notice that, hey, that's the throne that Sothis was been sitting on when we had all the visions, all like the dreams. Like Sothis was always sitting on this throne, and it's the same one. You're going to go down there. You're going to get a divine message, a message from the goddess that's going to like, lead us into the future. And so you're like, okay. You're like, oh, you can bring your class with you. Like when Saros got her divine message, it said that she was around all of her allies, so you can bring them all with you. Like we can all go do it together. And so you go do it, and Rhea's like, go sit in the chair. And so you go and you sit in the chair and nothing happens. Nothing happens. It's like, and Ray is like, I was really pretty sure something was going to happen here. Like, are you sure you don't feel anything? And you're like, yeah, no, I don't feel anything. But then something else happens. So this is the part where the game takes a turn. This is the big reveal. I should point out that your house leader has really been the only other character who's been interacting with you in a way that's important to the story. And of course that depends on who you picked. If you have Claude as your house leader, then he has always been like pretty suspicious of the church and dealings. Like, he isn't really into the religion of the church, and so he's always kind of curious about like what secrets they're keeping, so he's always ready for that. Dimitri, he's been, like, if you choose him, he's been a little bit weird. He's pretty straight-laced most of the time, but you find out a little bit about his backstory, which I can get into later. He's been doing some investigating. Like when Flane was kidnapped, I think, you and his vassal, Dedu, you find him that he's been like reading these books in the library, like kind of in secret. Edelgard, if she's your house leader, she shares with you a little bit about her background, which is really messed up, and I'll get to more on that in a bit. But in her and Hubert, like her sidekick, they seem to go away sometimes too. Like, there's at least one story where they're just not there if you don't choose them, and I think maybe if you do. Here's the part where things change. Everybody's here at the Holy Tomb. They're expecting something to happen. It doesn't. And then a bunch of Imperial troops show up. They're in red, so they're with the Empire. And they're like, okay, like, we're going to take all this stuff now. We're going to take all these crest stones, because the Flame Emperor shows up again. And the Flame Emperor is like, Rhea, the church, we're taking over. We're going to steal these crest stones because they're a source of power. So we're going to take them all now. You're all of a sudden in the middle of a fight, and they're opening up these tombs, because you're in a tomb, and they're taking the crest stones. They're the things that go inside the relics. They give them the power. Like, they're going to take them. And Rhea's like, don't take them. Like, that's bad. Like, don't do that. But you get into a fight, and you have to fight the Flame Emperor at the end. You get to this point, and you unmask the Flame Emperor. And it's Edelgard. Yeah. This goes in a little bit of a different order depending on which route you're playing, but whichever one it is, the Flame Emperor is always Edelgard. Like, it's been Edelgard all along. And you're like, what? And she's like, yep, it's me. The church sucks. We're going to war with the church. Bye. And they take off. Like, Hubert shows up again. If you'll notice, Hubert was missing in the first, like, when you're doing the monastery stuff. Hubert shows up and teleports Edelgard away, and they're gone, and everybody's like, what? Like, Edelgard is the Flame Emperor? The person who's been behind all the bad stuff all this time is Edelgard? So you're like, uh-oh. Chapter 12. There's actually a couple names for this chapter, depending on how things went, but we're going to go with Outset of a Power Struggle. So yeah, turns out Edelgard has seized power from her father. Depending on what you do, sometimes you might get a cutscene with her dad, Emperor Ionius the Ninth. So it turns out you get a little cutscene here to explain what happened. Edelgard has deposed her father. She is now the emperor of the Adrestian Empire. She has formally declared war against the church. It seems that she's like, I don't like the church being in control. They're no good, and I'm going to go to war with them. We're going to take them out. We're no longer following the church, which of course puts them at war with the kingdom and the alliance. So she's just declared war on most of the country, most of the continent. And so again, there's a little bit of a split here depending on how you play. For the most part, this is how it's going to go. So I'll describe it this way. Everybody is, of course, really surprised, and they're in Garrigmach, but like everything is sort of in disarray now. The Empire is marching forces to Garrigmach to take it down. What do? We just got to defend it. So Edelgard brings a giant army to Garrigmach to take it down, to conquer it. You're out there fighting in the streets. You're trying to keep it safe. At a point, Rhea comes up to Byleth and is like, stay back. I got this. And so Rhea walks out, and Rhea turns into a giant dragon. Now, to rewind a bit, back when we were talking about the background of the Church of Saros, when Saros fought Nemesis, there was a story of this like big dragon coming down called the Immaculate One, and like the goddess sent the Immaculate One and helped out Saros to win the fight. And based on like kind of the descriptions that we had seen and some of the like artwork that's around, this is a big white dragon. It looks a lot like the Immaculate One. But yeah, Rhea turns into a big white dragon, and they're bringing like beasts that are some like the black beasts that you fought along the game, like they're attacking, but Rhea is like breathing fire and like wiping out all kinds of people as this big dragon. Byleth's the only one who sees this, so as far as anybody else can see, this dragon just appeared and started fighting along with. It's going okay, but they just keep sending out forces. And at one point, Edelgard, who was there in the battle, says, like, tell my uncle to launch the attack. And you probably, not always, but you probably learned that Edelgard's uncle is Lord Arundel, the guy who we saw talking with the Flame Emperor earlier. So I guess some new forces come in. Byleth actually jumps down onto the battlefield, fighting them off with a sword. And then the guy shows up who saved Monica / Crania. When we tried to rewind time, he showed up and he put the shield up. That guy shows up again, and he has these oddly dressed mages, and like fires a magic blast at Byleth. Byleth tries to fight it off, but Byleth gets like blasted off of a convenient cliff and just falls down into the, I would say abyss, but that's a different thing in this game. So yeah, so Byleth like just falls into like the proverbial bottomless pit, and that's that. That's the end of the chapter. And at this point, the game takes a big jump, and it goes into several different directions depending on what house you're playing as. But that's the end of part 1 of the game. Part 2. So yes, this is finally where we're getting into the second part of the game. Now, your part 2 is different depending on which house you chose. The way I'm going to do this here is we're first going to start with the part called Verdant Wind. This is the part 2 if you chose the Golden Deer house. I'm doing it because I chose the Golden Deer house first, and frankly, I like it the best. So this is just what we're going to do. Chapter 13, Reunion at Dawn. Byleth sort of like comes to, sort of, but they're in like kind of the dream realm again, like when they talk to Sothis, and what do you know? Sothis is talking again. She's not appearing like she was before, but she's saying, hey, wake up. You do wake up, and you're like on a riverbank somewhere. You run into just a local person. You try to figure out what's been going on. They're like, oh yeah, don't you know, like we've been at war for 5 years. So yeah, we're 5 years into the future. So here's something I forgot to mention that should be way earlier. After the ball, when you're talking with your class, you all decide, hey, we should all meet back up here because in 5 years it's going to be like the Millennium Festival or something. It's the 1000th year anniversary of the church. Yeah, 1000 years of the church. And so in 5 years they're planning to have like a big old festival. So they're like, hey, whatever we're doing, let's meet back up here in 5 years. So you decide, I'm going to go back to the monastery, just kind of get the lay of the land, see what's going on. So you go back there. Remember, you made that deal that with the class that like in 5 years we'll all get back together again. You go back, and luckily Claude is there. He's in like a new outfit. It turns out he's the leader of the Alliance now, like he was supposed to be. And they're like, hey, you're alive. That's awesome. He does the thing like, I always thought you were probably alive. But where you been? And like you kind of try to explain to them, I think I was just asleep for 5 years. And I was like, okay, whatever. Claude's happy to see you again. You go onto the monastery that has been besieged by bandits because it's been abandoned for the past 5 years. But you beat the bandits, and like while you're fighting the bandits, all of your class shows up. All of the Golden Deer show up. It's 5 years later. Everybody has like new pictures, new looks. It turns out that like they all remembered the pact that you made from 5 years prior to show back up, and they all did. So yeah, so you go back in, and kind of everybody kind of brings Byleth up to speed of like, so yeah, the Empire went to war with everybody. They have conquered half of the kingdom. So like half of the kingdom is called the Fargus Dukedom, I believe, and it's run by this lady named Cornelia, who we're not going to see any more of now, but we'll talk about some more later. The other half is still like technically the Holy Kingdom of Fargus, but like they're kind of dwindling. Yeah, Dimitri got killed years ago, so like they don't really have a king. Now the Alliance, since they're not run by one central power, they're kind of 50-50 split. Like half of the houses, like as you might imagine, the half that border the Empire are sort of loyal to the Empire, and half of them sort of resist the Empire. Claude kind of keeps them like this, keep them balanced out like this, so they don't have to like be for or against the Empire. Kind of keeps them out of the conflict, so they're like officially neutral. But of course, Claude doesn't like this. Like he is kind of leading the anti-imperial sentiment, but he's not going to take the Alliance into the fight with the Empire. Like that's kind of what the kingdom has been doing. And the church is sort of a shambles, because it turns out during the Battle of Garreg Mach, as they call it, Rhea disappeared. Like Byleth, of course, disappeared, but also Rhea disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to Rhea. They didn't see her turn into the monster, but it's also unclear what happened to her anyway. So Rhea's gone. The knights have been looking for her for the past 5 years, and let's call it kind of all a shambles. But now that Byleth's back, they kind of figure they're like, well, maybe we can do something here. Maybe we can actually fight back against Edelgard. Chapter 14, The Alliance Leader's Ambitions. Again, Claude is trying to keep the Alliance as a whole out of the fight, so they decide that we'll fight under the banner of the Crest of Flame, so kind of like under Byleth's banner. And this gets all the church people back, so any like the teachers, Sedeth, they all come back into the game. And like, okay, we're all going to fight. Like, we've been out looking for Rhea. Like, let's start bringing the fight to the Empire. Immediately, the Empire attacks. Apparently, like, they had people, spies around Garreg Mach, who told them, like, hey, Byleth's back. And they're like, well, we better beat them now. So they immediately launch a counterattack. There's some, like, Empire people, Ladislava and Randolph, who show up. They attack you at the monastery. You do beat them. They die. You do have enough to like resist against them. You figure this out. But they quickly realize that, okay, they just like attacked us. We need more than just like the remains of the Knights of Saros. We need some reinforcements. Claude probably recommends, hey, there's this person who's close to my family, this general, her name is Judith. Like, we can probably get reinforcements from her to like add to the, Crest of Flame banner and actually like take the fight. So the first thing we need to do is get some reinforcements. Oh, it's also here that you've learned a little bit more about what Claude wants to do with this war. Because again, he's been like not fighting in it. Back before, he wasn't like super into the church either. So it's like, what is his idea? And you kind of learn a little bit about his background here. And so it turns out that Fodlan has always been kind of racist. If you looked around at everybody's skin tones, you may have come to a similar conclusion. So the Alliance is right up against like the next neighboring country, because the rest of the continent is bordered by water. The next country over is named Elmira. It's separated by a mountain range. It's kind of like the Urals in Europe. It seems Claude has some connection with Elmira. Again, Claude has one of the darker skin tones in this game, and so you might have guessed there's something going on there. Oh yeah, by the way, Claude's background in the game. Claude's grandfather was in charge of the Alliance, and he didn't have an heir who would take over for him. And again, this is an alliance of nobles, so there isn't like a definitive line of succession. And other people were talked about, like Hilda's brother Holst was one of the people who was being discussed to take over. But then, like kind of out of nowhere, Claude showed up. And he's like, oh, he's the grandson of Duke Regan, who is in charge of the Alliance at the time. So he will be the next person in line. And so it becomes pretty clear, if you look at the text, that Claude is not from the Alliance. It seems Claude is from Elmira. and it seems he is actually related to Duke Regan. He is his grandson, but like, why wasn't he around? It seems pretty clear that he is born from Elmira and Duke Regan's daughter. You can kind of figure this out. And so Claude's whole thing is like, yeah, this has been messed up for years. Like, Edelgard's fighting against the class system, the nobility. Like, I'm kind of with that, but like, yeah, we don't need to go to war over it. And kind of the ethos of the church has always been that, like, the land of Fodlan are like the people chosen by the goddess, and they kind of keep themselves off from the rest of the world. Claude wants to end that. He wants to open it up and actually like engage with the rest of the world. So that's kind of what he is like hoping for at the very end of the day. Chapter 15, Valley of Torment. So they're going to get the reinforcements from Judith, but if they were to do that directly, they would have to march their armies through Empire-friendly territory, and like, even if they might want that to happen, like, that would risk hostility with the Empire, so they can't really do that. So they decide that we're going to go to this inviting place called the Valley of Torment, ALL. It's this, valley, apparently, with it's just like lava and fire all over the place. We hear about this like legend that apparently like a big fireball came out of the sky one day and just like landed on it, because it used to be like lush and green, but something came out of the sky and just like landed there, like a meteor or something. We'll go there because, it's awful and there probably won't be Empire patrols there, and then we'll collect the reinforcements there and then bring them back to the monastery. So they go off to do this, but there were spies there still, and they get to ALL, and Count Rowe, who is one of the nobles who joined with the Empire from the kingdom, they show up there. And so they have a little fight. They beat Count Rowe. Judith and her people show up, and they finally like get together and like, okay, like, we got our armies, let's go back to Garreg Mach, and we're gonna group up there. Once you have the reinforcements, they decide, okay, we can help get more of the Alliance on our side if we actually take that pressure off of them, like the bordering areas. So we're going to go to the Great Bridge of Myrddin. And this is like there's a river that separates the Alliance and the Empire. This is like a fortress bridge that's right there. We have the people, we're going to go to the bridge, we'll take the bridge, and then that will get more of the Alliance people on our side. Chapter 16, Rose-Colored River. They go to the bridge. It's like a big fort. Some of the people who stayed on Edelgard's side show up. Like, you might get Ferdinand. I fought him here. So you fight on the bridge, and you do take the bridge. So now that the bridge is secure, they're like, all right, we have this kind of stronghold against the Empire on this border. So things are looking better. We can actually progress. Also, since you're in Alliance territory, Claude takes you to meet Nardel, I think is his name at this point. His real name is Nader, not Nader, Nader. And it is strongly implied that this is Claude's father. It's never stated that I could find that that's definitely the case, but it's strongly implied that this is his dad, and he's an Elmiran general. He's actually running things in Claude's land while he's with you fighting stuff. So you meet Nardel is the name that he goes by here. You're like, okay, we have more friends, we're gaining some traction, let's go. Chapter 17, Blood of the Eagle and Lion. Now that they have the bridge secured, the Alliance forces can start looking at actually attacking the Empire and trying to like force them back. But it's about this time when they get word that something's coming. Something's coming from north. There's been like an army that's moving south from the kingdom, and they don't know what it is. It's flying the banner of Blathid, which is Dimitri's name. But Dimitri's dead, so they don't know who this is or what they're doing or where they're going, but something's coming. And at the same time, they learn that the Empire is sending forces up north towards the bridge, like, gonna meet them there too. So like, well, we better get down on there, and like, because the rumor is that Edelgard is leading the forces herself. And so they get to Gronder Field, which is where we had the Battle of the Eagle and Lion in part 1, where they had like the all friendly contest, but now things are much more serious. And it turns out that unidentified army that was coming down from the north is led by Dimitri, who is alive, but also crazy. He's missing an eye now. He's got an eye patch, but he is out of his mind, and he's leading this army in, which was very frustrating to me as a player because it's like, dude, we're both fighting against the Empire because that's all Dimitri wants. He really wants to kill Edelgard, like really wants to kill her. And it's like, we can work together, but no, he's just there to kill everybody. And sure enough, Edelgard also is leading her army, so she's on the field too. So you get a repeat of the Battle of Eagle Line where all the three houses fought each other, but now you're on the same map even, but you're fighting for real. You win, of course. You do win the battle. In the aftermath, Edelgard is wounded because you actually get to fight her in the map, but she retreats. She gets out of there. You do have to fight Dimitri and all his people. He withdraws during the actual battle, but then you learn after the fight that apparently Dimitri died. For real this time, because he was running away and a bunch of Empire guys jumped on him and killed him. Hilda tells you this. Hilda says, yeah, I saw him get killed, but he dies just off screen. You're like, oh, Dimitri's dead, and I guess all of their armies are gone. Dedue is there as well, and there's a bit of dialogue about, what about Dedue? Did Dedue die? I don't know. He just disappeared. He's gone. But, that mystery army that's come down, that was them, and they're gone now. But, we force back the Empire. Edelgard's been wounded. She's going to have to retreat. It's this is the perfect opportunity for us to go into Empire territory and start taking the fight to them. It's also at this point that Lysithea brings something to your attention. Now, remember before when I said that everybody's backstories are not super important? Here's a little exception. So let me talk about Lysithea. So Lysithea, one of the best units in the game, super powerful magic user. So she was always the youngest student at the academy. I think she's 15 when the game starts. Younger by 4 or 5 years than anybody else. She's presented as super smart. She has this long white hair, a fair complexion. When you get supports with Lysithea, you learn that she's very much a child still, but she's very serious, and she takes her studying super seriously. She sees it as very important. And when you dig into it, you start to pick up on this thread of that she doesn't think she has a lot of time to be studying or to be at the academy. She doesn't have as much time as everybody else does. At this point in the story, she comes up to Byleth and Claude and is hey, I got to tell you guys something I noticed. When we were fighting the Empire there, they had these wacky mages. I've seen them before. I've seen this kind of magic before. It turns out that back in the day, for reasons, her House Ordelia, had come into conflict with the Empire. They're another territory that borders the Empire, and they had come into conflict, and they kind of come out on the bad end of things. And so they got occupied by some Empire forces. And it turns out that some of these dark mages showed up at her place, and they kidnapped a bunch of kids and started doing magic experiments on them. And all those kids died, except for Lysithea. Lysithea is the only one who survived. She said her white hair, it didn't used to be that color, it turned white. And what they had done to her is she had a crest, a lot of nobility does, but they added a second crest to her. So she has 2 crests. And they figure, or at least Lysithea believes, that is essentially burning out her life faster. She figures that she has maybe 5 more years left to live, and then she'll die. That's why she was so focused on studying and doing everything that she could, because she wants to take care of her family, make sure they're all set up before she dies. That's why she's so strong. That's why she's such a good magic user in the game. And she's yeah, those guys that we fought there, they're the same. They're the same magicians. So these weird dark mages who were doing these wacky experiments on me, they're working for the Empire. So you get the impression that these are some bad guys who the Empire has aligned themselves with. Chapter 18, The Golden Scheme. Now that we have the bridge, we can start moving into Empire territory, and the place where we're going to hit is called Fort Mercius. It's like one of these like big, like impregnable fortresses that the Empire has, and if they can take this fort, then that'll give them a stronghold in Empire territory, and they can launch attacks on the capital from there. They come up with this plan to like steal Imperial outfits. They play dress up, and they're going to get inside the fort and then attack it from inside because it's been impregnable before. So they do this. Claude brings in Nadir again and forces from Elmira, this neighboring country. So that was completely unexpected, and it totally works. They get inside the fortress. The Death Knight is there again. Remember the Death Knight? He's back. Like, he's kind of running things, and you actually have to fight him, and you get to beat him there. And you do take the fort. Now, you don't kill the Death Knight. He actually escapes. He runs off, and he kind of tells you, like, hey, you probably want to leave now. And, like, he gets outside of the fortress walls, and he goes and he points up into the sky. And, like, you had followed him out there, and you sort of look back, and you look up into the sky, and something is happening. There's, like, some magic stuff going on in there, but what appears to be a missile is coming out of the sky, and it comes out of the sky, it hits Fort Mercius, and blows the whole thing up. Now, remember, like, this is, like, the fort that couldn't be taken and everything. This is just thing falls out of the sky and blows it up like a nuclear weapon, blows it up. And so everybody is really surprised. Like, this is a weapon that nobody's ever seen before. This kind of, let's call it firepower, is not something that exists. Like, this is magic that's beyond everything. So everybody's kind of shook. Like, well, we were going to take the fort, but the fort isn't there anymore. So they fall back to they fall back to the bridge of Murden. And they're like, wow, what are we up against? Chapter 19, The Chaos of War. So, despite the fort getting destroyed, they still have a clear shot to Enbar, which is the capital of the Empire. Edelgard's fallen back there as well, so like, well, let's just go for it. Like, this is the best time. Edelgard still had retreated from the Gronder fight. Fort Mercius is just gone, so they're not using it either. Let's go. And so they march to Enbar. There's a big fight in the streets. The Death Knight and Hubert are there, and you finally get to defeat both of them. They're both killed. At this point, it's still not confirmed who the Death Knight is, but you do it. And you've come to that point of like, well, we just had to take the Imperial Palace next. And then Dedue shows up. Yes, Dedue again. He did not die at Gronder. He is still alive. And he shows up and is like, yeah, I've been here for a long time. Ever since the battle, I snuck into Enbar. And I've been here just gathering intelligence. And he tells the group that, like, yep, Edelgard's up there. Here's a map. And he's like, Dedue, do you want to join us? And he's like, I'm good. I'm going on my own. I'm going to kill Edelgard because that's what Dimitri wanted. I'm going to fulfill his wish. And they're like, okay. And so they prepare to attack the palace and get Edelgard. Chapter 20, Conclusion of the Crossing Roads. So it's time. Everybody attacks the palace. They run up in there. You actually do fight Edelgard and all of her forces. Dedue shows up in the battle, which is awesome. Like, he totally saved me the first time I played through, and like, I unfortunately let him die, and I was very sad about that. But we did it. We got to Edelgard. You get a cutscene where she is essentially like, you're going to have to kill me because I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to keep coming. And Byleth does it. Byleth kills her right there. So the Emperor is dead. War's over. You won the war. But there's a little bit more. So after you come down out of the palace, somebody has a letter. Like, there's an Imperial troop who's like, Hubert gave me this letter. He told me if we lose, give it to you guys. So you're like, huh. And Hubert's like, okay, here's the deal. Like, I wrote this just in case we lost. There's somebody else out there who's worse. The black mages that Lysithea mentioned that they've been dealing with. There's this group of people. They call them those who slither in the dark. And we've been working with them. They're behind all this stuff, but they're like really bad. And like Hubert says, we had planned to take them out once we won the war. But like, if you want like a peaceful Fodland, like, you better take them out now if you beat us, because they're just going to cause trouble for you. And rightly, somebody's like, hey, why didn't you just tell us before you got killed, Hubert? Like, geez. Hubert like he's been gathering intelligence forever, but he could never move on them. And it turns out that when they're the ones who fired that missile onto the fort. And when they did that, their use of the magic sort of like gave them away. And Hubert found out where their base is. And he gives you the locations, like, so if you wanted to finish this for good, you got to go there. You got to take him out. So it's like, okay, well, the war is over, but there's this lingering thing here. So, like, let's go. Let's go take it out. Oh, but then also, now that the palace has been liberated, they search it, and they find Rhea. Rhea is alive. Rhea's been held captive inside the palace for all these years. And, she's, weak and everything, but Claude and Byleth still get to the point of like, hey, Hubert is telling us all these things about those who slither in the dark. What's he talking about? Like, is this real? And she's like, yeah, that's actually true. And sort of comes clean with some things that apparently all that history that the church talked about isn't 100% true. So it turns out, remember Nemesis, the guy who wielded the sword before, the official story was that the goddess gifted him the powers and then he went bad later. But that's not exactly the case. It turns out Nemesis was a thief, and Nemesis stole this power from the goddess somehow. And he was aided in that by those who slither in the dark. Apparently they were a faction of regular humans who were opposed to the goddess, and it seems that they have been working against them, for the past 1,000 years in secret. So yeah, what Hubert said is right. This place is there. Like, we got to go take it out if we're gonna stop them for good. Chapter 21: The City Without Light. Following Hubert's map, the letter that he left, they find the city where those who slither in the dark live. And it's underground. This is the proverbial city without light because it's always been underground, which would explain why their skin is so white, because they just don't live on the surface. And so they're going to attack this place. It's called Shambhala, but when I first got there, I gave it the name Dubstep City because you get there and this is the music that plays. Yeah, that was a surprise. You attack the city. Beforehand, when you regrouped at the monastery, Rhea was like, I'm coming too. And they're like, are you sure, Rhea? Like, you were just imprisoned for 5 years. Maybe you should stay here and rest. But you're like, nope, I'm going to stop these people. Like, they've been menacing the church forever. We're going to put a stop to them. So Rhea comes with. And you fight, and it is, like, way different. Not just the music. Everything is very technological. Whereas it's been like, Middle Ages fantasy type stuff. This is all like technological. There's like lights inside. They're shooting like electricity at you. Right now they have, again, robots that come after you have to beat. The main guy there is the guy who shot the magic at you in the Battle of Garreg Mach. It's the guy who stopped you from saving Geralt. This guy named Tullus. So you fight him again. You're able to beat him. But with his dying breath, he uses some magic, and he sends more of those missiles down upon the city itself, presumably just to kill everybody. The first one just blows a hole in the roof, so they can see 6, 7 more missiles coming down on them. So Rhea turns into the big dragon again that we saw at Garreg Mach, and jumps up there to stop them all. She absorbs a lot of the blast, but is ultimately able to save the city, save all the students, but she's really badly hurt. But they beat everybody. They took down Tullus, who seemed to be in charge, and they go back to Garreg Mach. Looks like they've wiped everybody out. Chapter 20, Fodlan's New Dawn. But they didn't wipe everybody out, because we get a little cutscene that shows like a sarcophagus, essentially, that's wrapped in chains, and after the city goes down, 2 hands bust out of the thing, break the chains, and something comes out. So we go back to the monastery, and Rhea's like really bad off. But eventually, like, Claude and Byleth get a chance to talk to her and say, like, obviously you've been lying for some time. It's time to come clean. Like, what's going on? And so Rhea admits some things because everybody saw her turn into the big dragon. And she's like, okay, here's the deal. I'm Saros. Lady Saros, the one who founded the church, that's me. I'm also the Immaculate One. Yeah, like when I turned into the dragon, like that was me. She kind of comes clean about that. And about the same time, the soldiers come around and it's like, hey, something bad's happening. There's like an army that's marching like from Shambhala to here. They're coming directly to here. And they're flying the Crest of Flames also. So Rhea is like, crap. And it actually has to come clean on everything. So it turns out, again, the story about the goddess giving them all the powers to fight the evil gods, not true. As it turns out, when the goddess came down, when Sothis came down and like gave all the good stuff to the people, there was a group of humanity called the Agarthans. Those are those who slither in the dark. And the Agarthans were like, well, we can do better. As humans, like, we can be just as good. And so they came into conflict with the goddess. And at some point, they fought each other and they just like razed the continent. Things were really bad. Sothis used almost all of her power to like help things get put back to normal. And after that, she had to rest, go into like a long slumber or something, long winter's nap. The Agarthans used this opportunity. They hired Nemesis to go to her tomb, like where Sothis was sleeping, and steal her blood and body and heart. And they injected the blood into Nemesis. That gave him the Crest of Flames. That gave him his powers. And they made the Sword of the Creator from Sothis's bones. Like if you've looked at the relics, they look very bone-like, and that's because they are. They're bones of the people of the goddess, and the crest stones are the hearts. So one other thing that Rhea also explains at this point is a little bit about Byleth's birth. Remember that Byleth's mother died during childbirth? Well, it turns out Rhea was in on that and a part of it. For reasons that we'll get to later, Byleth's mother had the crest stone of Sothis, the goddess, inside of her. And that was her heart. And when she gave birth to a child, that child was stillborn, like was not alive. And Citri kind of pled with Rhea to say, like, save my child. It doesn't matter if it costs me my life, save the baby. Rhea agreed to this and took the heart out of Citri, took the heart, that is the crest stone, and put it into the baby. So that's why Byleth doesn't have a heartbeat, because their heart is the crest stone of Sothis, of the goddess. And so that's why Byleth can wield the Sword of the Creator without the stone there, because the stone is inside of Byleth. So that's weird. So when Rhea's telling you all about Nemesis' actual history, because all this stuff is like based in half-truths and or just made up to sound better. And here's what really happened. Nemesis got the power, he got the goddess blood in him, and he got the Sword of the Creator, which is made from the goddess's body. And he used that power to kill pretty much all of the goddess's children, and then used their blood and their bodies to A, give the 10 elites their power, and B, use their body to build the ancient relics. And the relics work because the crest stones, the stones that go into them, are the hearts of the goddess's children. And so, like, yeah, that's who Nemesis is. Yeah, and I fought him, and, like, I beat him. But it seems he's alive again. And, like, maybe something that happened in Shambhala woke him up. But, like, he does have the blood of the goddess in him, so that's not entirely crazy that he's awake again. And he's coming for us, like, right now. So, like, wow, that's a lot to take in. I guess we just had to beat him. So they go and they meet him on the battlefield, and you fight Nemesis. It was Nemesis who woke up. I guess he's a little zombied out, but he's strong enough. He has resurrected like shadow clones of all the 10 elites, so you have to fight all of them. And you do finally get to him. You work together with Claude, and you, with the Sword of the Creator, the real one, because Nemesis made like a new fake one, you're finally able to do it. You beat Nemesis, you kill him, presumably for good, he turns into dust. And it's finally over. The Agarthans have been beaten. The Empire's been beaten. So in the postscript, Byleth becomes the head of the church, and like by default, kind of the head of all of a unified Fodland, because everybody in the continent kind of comes together. Claude leaves and goes to rule Elmyra instead, because as it has seemed clear, he is of Elmyran heritage, and he can go and rule them instead. Because again, he wants to open up the world. He leaves Fodland in Byleth's hands and goes to rule in Elmyra instead. So that's Verdant Wind, and that's the first ending that I got. As you can imagine, there's a lot of things that made me go, wait, like, what? Like, what's going on in the other place? Like, where did Dimitri come from? What's Dimitri doing? Like, why did Edelgard start this war in the first place? Immediately after that was done, I had to go back in and play again. And so this is just the first route of Fire Emblem Three Houses. Part 2 again. Now it's time to go back, and we're going to talk about the other paths. This time we're going to do what's called Azure Moon. This is the path that you get if you choose the Blue Lion's house at the beginning. A couple things that are useful going into the Azure Moon Part 2. Dimitri. Dimitri is your house leader, and when you choose the Blue Lions. So in the first part of the story, you get a lot more information about him. And there's an important bit of business that goes on before the start of the story. So I'll just catch you up there. So again, Dimitri is the next ruler of Fargus. What happened in his family is a few years ago, his father, the king, and his stepmother were killed. There was an event called the Tragedy at Dusker, I believe it's called. A bunch of folks killed the king, his wife, or who I guess would be the queen. It's not Dimitri's mother, it's his stepmother. And everybody in the party, and left Dimitri barely alive. In the meantime, Dimitri's uncle, Rufus, has been ruling the kingdom. Presumably, Dimitri is just too young to take the throne, because there's a little bit of dialogue saying, like, why don't you just be king now? And people are speculating that, he's just going to follow the rules. So presumably he's just too young. As you might imagine, this has had some effect on Dimitri. And usually he's pretty buttoned up and straight-laced. But there are times when he goes a little wild and gets a little crazy, but like just a little bit. And in particular, one of his friends, Felix, is always really critical of him, and he calls him the Boar Prince, like B-O-A-R, Prince. And he thinks like he's not super great because there's something that he witnessed him doing, and he doesn't think he's a very good guy, ultimately, even though they're friends, and he's still, the prince, but he's a bit critical. And another thing that we learn, Dimitri and Edelgard are step-siblings. As it turns out, Dimitri's stepmother, the one who got killed during the Dusker incident, that was Edelgard's birth mother. And Edelgard and Dimitri actually met each other when they were kids. They didn't know about their relation at the time. Edelgard had been taken away from the Empire at that time. But, not a lot of people know this. It's a pretty secretive thing, but you do find out over the course of Part 1 that Dimitri and Edelgard are related in that way. And, accordingly, when the reveal comes in Part 1 that Edelgard is the Flame Emperor, Dimitri loses it. It kind of breaks his brain. And he goes all out and just is murdering fools left and right. All the guards that are around Edelgard, there's bits where he's breaking necks and just killing people. He goes pretty wild. And pretty immediately when you have dialogue with him after that, he is dead set on just murdering Edelgard. He is so angry. If you get some dialogue ahead of time, it seems that Dimitri kind of figured this out ahead of time, that Edelgard was behind everything. And then when it got revealed, he just sort of lost it. And he was super, super angry. Another thing about their relationship, there's this story that gets brought up in the dialogue about Dimitri gifting a girl a dagger by mistake, because it's a Fargus tradition to give somebody you care about a dagger, and he gave that to her, and it was how and people kind of make fun of him about how weird a gift that was, but they don't know it was Edelgard that he's talking about. So that's something that's in their history. And again, once it's revealed that she is the Flame Emperor, he is very upset. So again, the same sort of things happen. Byleth wakes up on the river. Byleth goes back to Garreg Mach, and this time, Dimitri is there, and he's looking pretty bad. Again, he's missing the eye. He has the eye patch on. Before you get to him, you find a bunch of like dead bodies of Imperial agents that are like strewn about. When Dimitri sees you, like he thinks he's hallucinating. You know, he's like, oh, here's another dead person who's coming to torment me, and you have to do a little bit of convincing. So you're like, nope, I'm real. He is not especially happy to see you. He's just sort of like, whatever. And it's come clear that Dimitri isn't all there. Like, he's really sort of gone through it in the time. Apparently, you know, when the war started, again, the Empire got about half of the kingdom and tried to depose him. They killed his uncle. They tried to execute him, but Dedu sacrificed himself to let Dimitri escape. So his sort of status in the 5 years has been unclear, but he's definitely not been in the capital, and he's been out in the world just trying to find revenge on Edelgard for betraying him. There's some more bandits who are just skulking around Garreg Mach, so you attack and kill those bandits. And again, all of your classmates show up because of the pledge you made to reunite at the end of 5 years. And also Gilbert. Gilbert, who, just to give a little backstory on him, he was one of the knights who was supposed to be protecting the family when they got killed at Dusker, and he wasn't there, so he felt really bad about it, and so he changed his name. His name used to be Gustav. He changed his name, left his family, Annette is his daughter, and came to work for the Knights of Saros as kind of like atone for himself. He makes a lot of interesting decisions. But anyway, so Gilbert shows up as well, and they're like, hey, Dimitri's alive, and Byleth is back. This is great. And they're like, hey, we can maybe get the kingdom back up on its feet now that we found everybody. But Dimitri's like, no, we're going to go kill Edelgard. That's all I want to do is just kill Edelgard. And he's like, I don't care about the kingdom. I don't care about anything. We're just going to go kill Edelgard. Just kill Edelgard. That's all he wants to do. And everybody's kind of like, okay, he is kind of the king. I guess we have to do it. And so things get going by, we're going to go kill Edelgard. Chapter 14, The Delusional Prince. Dimitri is not very pleasant. He's driven only by revenge. And he's also very crazy. This is a question for professionals, but I wonder if back in the attack on Dusker, he sustained some kind of head injury, some kind of long-lasting head trauma, because over the course of the game, he does mention that he's had a headache ever since the Dusker incident. And now it is clear that he is hallucinating. He's seeing his dead father and other dead people talk to him. That's why I thought you were a hallucination in the beginning. So he continues to have hallucinations and seeing ghosts. We as the audience never see these things. So it's never a question is this a real ghost? It's not. It's all in Dimitri's head. And so again, he's just single-minded on going after the Empire and going after Edelgard specifically. Again, there's a bunch of spies who've been watching Garreg Mach just in case things went down, and more specifically because those Empire guys went into Garreg Mach and they didn't come out because Dimitri killed them all. So the spies stooge off that, hey, there's a bunch of people gathering here, and so the Empire attacks the monastery. Again, Randolph leads them. So you have the fight against them. You beat him again. This time you have Randolph. Dimitri's got him, and Dimitri's going to torture him. Not necessarily for information about how to fight against the Empire, just to torture him. He's just going to torture him. He's pretty sadistic. Byleth comes in and finishes off Randolph, just kills him and say hey, enough of that, or we're not going to just torture people just to torture them. And so they figure that okay, the Empire's onto us. They're going to start coming off after us. We need to fight back. And so the question is well, what should be our next step? Do we just go and fight the capital? Do we just go to Enbar and attack Edelgard? Or do we go back to the kingdom and sort of marshal our forces back in the kingdom now that we have our king again, and get reinforcements and then fight him there. And Dimitri is just like, no, we're just going to Edelgard. We're going to go to Enbar. We're going to kill her. That's all we're going to do. And everybody else is trying to convince him, like, it might be a better idea if we, like, thought about this strategically. He said, nope, that's not what we're doing. We're just going to kill Edelgard. Just kill Edelgard. That's all he wants to do. And at the end of the day, he's the king. So they're like, all right, we're going to kill Edelgard. We're going to Enbar. Chapter 15, Valley of Torment. If the plan is going to be to attack the Empire, they definitely need some reinforcements, not just their forces. We got the knights again, but, we need some more. And so, just like in the Verdant Wind route, the western half of the kingdom is the Fargus dukedom, so it's being controlled by Cornelia. But the eastern half, all of those houses are still fighting against the Empire, including House Fraldarius, which is led by Rodrigue, that's Felix's dad. And they're like, well, we can get reinforcements from Rodrigue. And so, again, just to keep out of the way of the Empire, they decide we're going to go to the Valley of Torment, to ALL, and we'll meet them there because it's really crappy and it's all on fire. And so they go to meet Rodrigue in ALL. And again, there are spies everywhere, so the Empire knows this. Count Rowe attacks you. You're able to beat Count Rowe. You meet up with Rodrigue, and we have our reinforcements. And now, given the chance to talk to Rodrigue, who was like kind of a surrogate father to Dimitri growing up, he tells him, like, hey, now that we got you back, actually, we should go to Ferdiad, which is the capital of the kingdom, and say, like, hey, we got our king back, and we have these forces, we can take the capital again, and we can kind of marshal everybody there before we move on. To which Dimitri replies, no, we're not doing that. We're going to Enbar. Like, this is what we came for. We need these reinforcements. Now we're going to march to Enbar, and we're going to kill Edelgard. Just kill Edelgard. That's all they want to do. So, again, he's the guy in charge, so that's what they're going to do. Chapter 16, The Rose-Colored River. If the plan is to go to the Empire, they come up with the idea to go through the Alliance territories, because, again, they are kind of in a deadlock about supporting and opposing the Empire, which Claude is trying to keep them neutral, essentially. So they decide to ask Claude for help, and Claude lets them kind of go through their territories and, in fact, dusts up some skirmishes, so they're kind of distracted, and the new army can get down to the Bridge of Myrddin, which, again, is on the river on the border, and so they're going to take the bridge, and this will allow them to get into the Empire. So there's defenses at the bridge again. Ladislava shows up again. And sometimes Dedue shows up again. Dedue, who we thought was dead. Now, apparently, this is dependent on whether or not you did a paralogue or a side story with Dedue. If you did, then he shows up. If you didn't, then he just doesn't, and he's actually dead. But for the sake of the story, we'll just pretend he's here. Yeah, Dedue shows back up, who Dimitri thought was dead. Everybody thought he was dead. And he shows back up again to help. They end up taking the bridge, and now they've secured kind of their entry point into Empire territory. Dimitri's really happy to see Dedue, a little happy reunion there. And then there's a little bit of an extra beat where this young girl shows up, comes right to Rodrigue and Dimitri and Bylothin's like, hey, can I join? And they're like, no, little girl, get out of here. But she's like, no, I want revenge on the people who killed my brother. Let me join, I'm ready to fight. And Dimitri's actually kind of moved by this. He understands revenge. That's the only thing he seems to understand. So he's like, you know what? Fine, you can join up, young Fleisch. That's her name, Fleisch. And here's a little bit that I skipped over before. There's a little bit of a cutscene before the Empire attacked us with Randolph and his sister, Fleisch. So Fleisch actually shows up some other places as well, but we know that Fleisch and Randolph are brother and sister. So when Fleisch is talking about getting revenge on the person who killed her brother, she means us. But Byleth and Dimitri don't know that. So that's fun. Chapter 17, Blood of the Eagle and Lion. Now that they got the bridge, they get intelligence that there's the Empire is building up near Fort Mercius again to stop them. They're going to probably meet at Gronder, where the Battle of the Eagle Line happened before the time skip. And so they get ready for that. They do come up with the idea like, hey, we should ask Claude for help so we can fight together at Gronder. And they send a messenger to deliver this message, but that messenger is killed. So they never get that message. Again, everybody shows up at Gronder Field. Edelgard brought the troops. So you have all three sides showing up again. And everybody fights everybody in the level. And over in the Verdant Wind route, this was sort of explained as like, why aren't we working together? Well, because Dimitri's crazy. This time it's a little harder to explain. Edelgard has a bit of dialogue about, I'm going to stir up the chaos in the battlefield, so nobody's going to know who they're fighting. So I guess we just have to go with that, with why the Alliance troops would attack the Kingdom troops. Sure, we'll go with that. But yes, everybody fights again. This time the Kingdom wins. Edelgard again is wounded, but retreats. After the battle, there's just sort of like taking everything in. When Fleisch shows up again and jumps Dimitri, takes this opportunity to just attack him, and she stabs him. She gets him. And he's down. She's going in for the kill to avenge her brother when Rodrigue does the sacrifice, jumps in and takes the shot, gets stabbed. They kill Fleisch. I think Byleth fights Fleisch and kills Fleisch, so she's down. But Rodrigue is mortally wounded, and this actually happens to snap kind of Dimitri out of his murder rampage when he sees his new father figure dying. Rodrigue kind of tells him to straighten up before he dies, and this really gets his attention. It actually manages to get him back into the more like the Dimitri we had before. He's not single-minded and bent on revenge. He has a little bit more clarity and less insanity than he had been going on before. Chapter 18, The King's Triumphant Return. Dimitri has finally gotten it together, and he isn't single-minded focused on revenge after Rodrigue's death. Something in there, and I think Gilbert comes to him again and says hey, they're really struggling in Ferdiad, the kingdom capital. Maybe we should do something about that. And finally that kind of gets through to Dimitri. He says you know what? Okay, we're going to put our attack on the Empire on pause for a second. We're going to go north to Ferdiad and take it back. Because remember, Cornelia is running things in the Western Kingdom, and she's coming to Ferdiad to kind of take that over too, and get all of the kingdom lands. So instead, the gang marches up to Ferdiad. They're able to attack Cornelia, beat Cornelia. As she's dying, Cornelia kind of drops some information about the past and about what happened at the Dusker Massacre. Because a little bit earlier, Rodrigue and Gilbert were sort of comparing notes about what happened at Dusker when Dimitri's family died. They got to talking, and they're like, you know what? We never found the Queen's body. Patricia was her name. Dimitri's stepmother, they realized, they never found her body. And, furthermore, her coach, what was carrying her, they didn't find any evidence of that either. She just kind of disappeared. And they're like, that's kind of weird, right? And they started kind of talking to each other that, do you think she was involved? Do you think she was part of the plot to kill the king? And they're like, I don't know, man. But, we never found anything, so I don't know. And so then when Cornelia is dying, she sort of lets slip a little bit more information that, hey, Patricia was kind of involved in this too. She's all part of the plot. Dimitri's not happy to hear this, but he doesn't lose his mind, thankfully. But they did it. They beat Cornelia. And so now they have Ferdiad secured again. And Dimitri is pretty reticent at first to kind of greet the people as king, because he's been a crazy madman for 5 years. But when he steps out onto the balcony and everybody's cheering and happy to have the king back, he kind of sees I can't believe it that they're willing to accept me again. But okay, I'm going to kind of live up to my role as king here. And so we finally kind of get Dimitri back on the right page. Chapter 19, The Golden Deer's Plea. Immediately after Verdant is retaken, they get a note from Claude asking them to come to Deirdre, which is the capital of Regan territory, so it's kind of the capital of the Alliance. Dimitri does the math real quick, and he's like, there's no way this letter could have got to us this quick if, like, Claude didn't send it before we even took the city back. So, obviously, he was pretty sure that was going to happen. But he's saying that, like, the Empire's forces are coming to Deirdre to kind of take that, so that'll kind of shift control of the Alliance to their way. So he preemptively sent this request to, like, hey, can you come help us? And they decide, yeah, like, let's get over there. If we can get Deirdre, if we can stop them there, then, we'll have the Alliance on our side. This will shift the balance of power now that we've taken the kingdom back for the most part. So they go to Deirdre, and Lord Arundel is leading the attacks there. Remember, Lord Arundel is Edelgard's uncle, and, by extension, Dimitri's step-uncle, so he knows him. And he's leading the attack on Embar. And they have a lot of the black mages, Agarthan mages with them. They don't know that in this timeline, but we might recognize them since we played it before. But they attack. They're able to beat them back. Lord Arundel is killed. They save Deirdre. And in response to this, Dimitri's like, thanks for coming. I knew you were gonna make it. Dimitri plans to dissolve the Alliance. He's like, yeah, I'm just gonna leave. I'm going to leave Fodland, go elsewhere, probably Elmira, maybe other places. But I'm going to go, and I'm going to cede all of the territories to the kingdom. So the kingdom has the entire Alliance now. And gives you all a pat on the back and says, hey, Dimitri, go in the war. Oh, and by the way, Claude managed to get this intel somewhere in the intervening 5 years that he knows that Rhea was captured during the Battle of Garreg Mach, and she is being held in the Imperial Palace. So if you're looking for Rhea, which they definitely still are, that's where she is. And gives you a pat on the back and says, go get him. To which they're like, hey, there we go. I guess we're going to the Empire now, like we always planned. Chapter 20, The Impregnable Fortress. So we get a little bit of a check-in with Hubert and Edelgard at this point. They see everything that's going on. They're still pretty confident that they can stop any advances that the kingdom is making toward them. But they do talk about, they have this kind of last resort type plan. And like things seem to be going well with it. But Hubert is not super happy about doing it. But they see like this should be in place if we need it. Now that the kingdom is kind of reestablishing itself, it has all the Alliance lands behind it, it's time to go. They're going to march into Empire territory, and so the first stop is going to be Fort Mercius, the big old fort that nobody can get in. I think they still do the plan where they play dress up and they invade the fortress that way. The Death Knight is there. Remember him? Like he shows up again. You fight and you actually kill the Death Knight here at Fort Mercius this time around. And now that they've taken the fort, they have a stronghold within the Empire, and they're ready to go the rest of the way. Before this happens, apparently they go back to Garreg Mach, and they find out that one of the prisoners of war that they've captured claims to have been involved in the Dusker massacre, where Dimitri's family died. And so we have a little interrogation scene where they talk to him, and Dimitri does not go down the torture route and is much more nice this time. This guy does confirm a lot of the story that they were kind of speculating about, that they were given instructions specifically not to harm the Queen's coach, like not to attack the Queen, not to attack Patricia. So it seems that everything everybody's been talking about that Patricia was in on it is true. Chapter 21, Our Chosen Paths. Again, now that Dimitri has returned to sanity, he decides to make one final plea to Edelgard to say, hey, this war doesn't need to go on anymore. Like, we can stop and maybe we can have a peaceful solution. Maybe we can talk it out. And so he sends word, and they actually get a positive response from Edelgard. And so they say, Edelgard's come bring in Hubert, like you and Dimitri and Byleth can come, like, and we'll talk it out. Like, we'll see if we can come to an agreement. And surprisingly, this works. It shows up, it's Hubert and Edelgard, and Byleth and Dimitri. And they do try to talk it out. Edelgard sort of lays out her ideas that, the system before with the nobility was bad. It was keeping people down, and that they're going to tear all that down, get rid of the religion that was ruling the continent, and just set up a purely secular world, and they'll just fight anybody who doesn't want to do that. And Dimitri is taking a nicer approach, saying hey, if people want to have religion, that's cool. We're not going to force them not to do it. I understand what you're saying about the nobility, but let's maybe not do it that way. And to which Edelgard's just no, I'm going to do it this way. We can't leave any of the old stuff behind. It's all got to go. And really they reach an impasse, and it's okay, we're just going to keep doing war. Goodbye. Now, there's a bit of a backstory that's going on here that I should explain just to make something make sense later. That's the story of the dagger. Remember that Edelgard and Dimitri are step-siblings. And when they were kids, when they're 10, 12, something like that, they met each other in Verdiad, in the kingdom. And they had a close friendship at the time. And when Edelgard was going to leave, Dimitri wanted to give her a gift. And the gift he gave her was a dagger, because there's this tradition about giving a loved one a dagger to help them fight the struggles in their life. And it strikes everybody as this a weird thing that he did. Nobody knows that was Edelgard in the story, but Sylvain bring this up in some of the dialogue about him giving a girl a dagger. So now, way back in part 1, there is a scene where the Flame Emperor is talking with Lord Arundel at the monastery, and Dimitri and Byleth happen to run across this. Before they all teleport away, the Flame Emperor throws a dagger at Dimitri. It doesn't hit him, but they use the distraction to teleport away. And when Dimitri sees it, he sees it's the same dagger that he gave to Edelgard way back in the day, or at least a similar one. And so that kind of is what tips him off earlier on than most that Edelgard is the Flame Emperor. And so he's had this dagger the whole time. And when they have their little parlay, when they decide they're going to cross paths, Dimitri gives her the dagger back and says, here, you drop this, essentially. And gives it back to her as a just sign of, I don't know, look how far we've come. Look at us now. So they decide to go their separate ways. And so then it's just back to war. They have the clear shot, so the kingdom forces march into Enbar, into the imperial capital. They fight in the streets. Hubert is there leading the forces. The kingdom wins, and Hubert is killed. So all that's left is to attack the palace itself. Chapter 22, Oath of the Dagger. It's time to attack the castle, attack the palace, the imperial palace. And remember before, Edelgard and Hubert were talking about this plan that they had just in case. Edelgard does the plan, and the plan is using the crest stones or something to make herself into this kind of half monster super Edelgard. It's called Hegemon Edelgard in the game. It's like Super Shredder version of Edelgard, this wacky monster version. And so that's what you have to fight. You fight all of Edelgard's forces, but then you also fight her in her monster form, and so she serves as the big boss. But you do beat her. When you beat her, she sort of doesn't just die straight off. She returns back to her normal form. And it's Dimitri and Byleth kind of come up and saying hey, do we got to do this? And Edelgard's yeah, we do. And so she throws Dimitri's dagger at him again, but she kind of throws it at both of them, maybe to hit Byleth. I think maybe to hit Byleth. But Dimitri steps in front. He takes the dagger shot, but uses his relic spear to stab Edelgard in the chest. He has the dagger on his shoulder, but she's got a chest full of relic, and Edelgard is killed. And that's it. The war is over. The Empire's been defeated. So in the PS here, we find out that they did rescue Rhea from the palace. She was alive. We never see this for some reason, but they rescue Rhea. Everything is the kingdom now. The kingdom has taken over everything, so It's just the Holy Kingdom Fargus is all of Fodlan now. Dimitri is installed as king, and Rhea retires in this version. Although we don't see this for some reason, but Rhea retires and Byleth is made head of the church. So Byleth is kind of going to run the church as it had been. Dimitri is going to run the state as all of Fodlan. So that's Azure Moon, and that's how we leave this story. This one is always strike me a little weird because what about the Agarthans? Part 2, again, Crimson Flower. You might have been wondering, like I was when I beat the game for the first time, what if I chose the Black Eagles? What if you play as the Black Eagles route where Edelgard is your house leader and then turns out to be the Flame Emperor, the person behind all of the bad stuff? So that's what we're going to talk about here. What if you chose the Black Eagle route? The part 2 on this is called Crimson Flower. We're going to get to this new stuff, but first, let's rewind a bit back into part 1. Pretty much everything goes the same way. You'll notice that some things make a little bit more sense, like in the chapter where you're chasing after the Death Knight, where Flame gets kidnapped. You remember that your house leader takes Manuela to the infirmary and is not there, and then the Flame Emperor shows up. I always thought that was a little clever bit of story, that your house leader is always gone, when in the Black Eagles route it has to be Edelgard as the Flame Emperor showing up. The special thing that happens here is you need to have a certain level of support, of relationship with Edelgard in order to even do this route. It's not difficult to do, but you have to get it to be able to go this way. When you get to a certain level of support with the characters, you'll get these little cutscenes. And so you get these with Edelgard, and you learn a bit about her past, which is important. Edelgard is one of 11 children of Emperor Ionius IX, and she's the only one who's like out and about, because at a certain point, a few years back, there was something called the Insurrection of the Seven, where a bunch of the noble houses, like, they didn't like what the emperor was doing, so they kind of like got together to render the emperor impotent, and so the emperor couldn't really do anything. This essentially succeeded, but it caused a whole bunch of turmoil within the empire. This is how Edelgard and her mother and her uncle sort of left the empire and went to live in the kingdom for a minute. This is where Edelgard and Dimitri met each other. And they hung out there for a while. Remember, Patricia, Edelgard's mother, ended up marrying the king of Fargus, Dimitri's father. Then they went back, and around this time, and you learned this in part 1, Edelgard was, along with like all of her siblings, were all imprisoned and experimented on, just like Lysithea had been. In fact, they were essentially doing the exact same thing. And you learned that Edelgard also has 2 crests. Her second crest is the Crest of Flames, just like Byleth has. Again, in the flashbacks, when you see young Edelgard, she has brown hair, just like Lord Arundel does, her uncle. But now Edelgard has white hair, just like Lysithea. So it seems the same exact kind of experimentation to put double crests on somebody to make them like super powerful also happened to Edelgard for reasons. And the other thing that happens, a little bit before the reveal comes about who the Flame Emperor is, you get an opportunity. Edelgard comes to you and says, "Hey, will you come with me to the capital? I need to do something important." And if you don't go with her, then you just can't get this second half of the game. But when you do go with her, it turns out that Edelgard goes to her dad, Ionius IX, and says, "You're really sick. Like, your time is almost over, so it's time for you to step down and just make me emperor." And he's okay with this. He's like, okay. Normally they would get the church on board with this because all of the states are sanctioned by the church. But Edelgard says, no, my professor, Byleth, is here, and they will serve in that role in this change of power. And so you get to see, maybe about a chapter or 2 at a time, where Edelgard actually took the throne and actually became the emperor at that point. So, going into the tomb bit where Rhea wanted you to sit on the chair and have something happen, right there Edelgard reveals themselves to be the Flame Emperor. And you actually do fight against Edelgard even when you chose them as your house. But then you're given an ultimatum. Once they reveal everything, Rhea, obviously is really upset because like there was somebody plotting against her, in her own school, and commands you as Byleth to kill Edelgard. She says, kill her right now. And so this is where you're given a choice. You can side with Rhea, or you can side with Edelgard. And so, if you side with Edelgard, then you get the Crimson Flower route. So here's what happens there. So, if you say no to Rhea and you stand with Edelgard, Rhea loses it. Like, she gets really upset and turns into the big white dragon, turns into the Immaculate One. This catches everybody by surprise because nobody knows that this is the thing that can happen. Rhea is really upset and feels like really betrayed, like really betrayed. You all leave. You leave and like anybody in your class comes with you, and you're not at the monastery anymore. You're at this like outpost that has Empire forces on it. And so you're on the other side of the Battle of Garreg gearing up to fight. Edelgard is going around telling everybody about like there's been monsters running the church forever. Like as long as there's been a church, there are these monsters who've been running it. This is like a secret that she knew, being the next in line for Emperor. And it's like, there, I just showed you, like Rhea just turned into a monster. She turned into a big dragon. And so like she's saying, we got to take the church down. We got to take the whole nobility system out. Like this is how we do it. We're attacking the church. And so you attack the church. This time you're on the attacking side. The fight goes a little bit differently because you're now like you're fighting to attack Rhea. And you do this, again, Rhea turns into the Immaculate One, turns into a monster and like brings down a part of the castle, and Byleth is sort of like buried in the rubble. Doesn't fall off the bottomless pit cliff again, but it's buried in the rubble. So, 5 years later, they wake up again. Now, as it turns out this time, the Empire has been occupying Garreg all this time. The church, everybody in the church fled to Ferdiad, fled to the kingdom. So Dimitri's there. Dimitri's the king. He has both of his eyes this time. Ferdiad has been the home of the church, and so they've been fighting the whole time. Again, the alliance is trying to stay neutral, so they're not taking sides, but the people who are bordering the empire are kind of with them, and the people who are bordering the kingdom are kind of with them. Everything has been kind of locked in a stalemate since then because all of the church forces have gone to the kingdom. But now that Byleth returns, Edelgard, is overjoyed to see Byleth again. But Edelgard thinks, oh, now we have Byleth with us. This could turn the tide of the war since we've been locked in this deadlock for years. And so they decide, well, we should go to the Great Bridge of Myrddin, the river between the Alliance and the Empire. And if we seize control there, then we can start kind of moving in through Alliance territory and attack the kingdom, get them from that end. So now, while you're getting this all set up, that's the plan. Hubert sort of takes you aside. Hubert, he's like second in command to the Emperor. Says like, hey, I got to tell you something. Do you remember Lord Arundel, the Edelgard's uncle? Is like, yeah, we're working with Lord Arundel, but I got to tell you, he has his own army of these like weird mystical people who have these wacky powers and this pale skin. We're pretty positive that they're the same people who Crania and Solon were with, and they don't know that we know, or maybe they do, but they're helping us, and we don't like them, but we're going to keep working with them for the time being. And he kind of tries to give you this like, we know they killed your dad, but we'll sort that out once we win this war. So they know who they're in bed with, but they just sort of are okay with it. And as Byleth, you just sort of have to be okay with it too, because you've chosen this part of the conflict at this point. So they let you know that they know what's up, but we're just going to have to roll with it until we're clear to attack them directly. Chapter 14, The Master Tactician. After taking the bridge, they've secured that kind of line up into the Alliance. They decide, okay, like let's just take out the Alliance. We'll take them down. If we go to Deirdre, which is the capital, we take out Claude. If we can do that, then the Alliance forces will all have to come under us because that's kind of the tipping point, and then we'll be sitting pretty. They do just that. They march to Deirdre. Claude tries to defend, but ultimately is beaten. You have a choice here of whether to spare or execute Claude. It doesn't really change anything whether you do or not. If you let him live, he's like, okay, well, I'm leaving again. I'm going to probably Elmira, but I'm just leaving the country. So, good luck. Bye. So now with Deirdre captured, the Alliance lands are kind of going to the Empire. They're sitting pretty well. It's about this time that Edelgard decides to kind of share what she knows about everything. And kind of the reason that she has for attacking the church in the first place. So the way Edelgard heard it, regarding the story of the creation of the church and the history of Fodlan, there was the whole thing about Nemesis and the 10 elites getting the weapons and the powers from the goddess. Apparently, this isn't true, according to Edelgard. They made the relics themselves. They had sort of risen to power kind of on their own, not by way of the goddess. And the whole thing about Nemesis and them getting corrupted wasn't true at all. There was like some kind of minor skirmish that happened that led to a disagreement that led to the big war. And that the church, Saros, sort of manipulated everybody in the world, like tricked everybody into like seizing power away from them and away from humanity. So they're like, the church is the cause of the crests and kind of stole the power away from the people who really deserved it. And also that sort of indirectly led to like her family getting all wiped out when all of those dark mages who were still working for some reason, or working with, I should say, did all the experiments on her to make her stronger and better. All that was because of the church, is because of Saros, because of the monsters who were running everything. So that's why this all started in the first place. That's why she's attacking them. And, that's the whole reason for the war. Chapter 15, Tempest of Swords and Shields. The Alliance is under Imperial control now. Everybody decides, we're going to go to the kingdom, take them out, and war will be over. About this time, the kingdom launches a counterattack. They go right to Garreg Mach and decide to attack you there. You get Randolph and Ladislava, who are like enemies who you fight on the other routes. They fight with you this time. They still die, but you're able to fend off the attack. Included in this attack are Sedith and Flayn, who had gone north of the kingdom, so they attack you as well. You can kill or spare them depending on like how you play it, but one way or the other, you beat them, you stop the attack. Because of this, because the church attacked the Empire, but you beat them, apparently this kind of sways the political climate in the kingdom, and a lot of the houses that are in the west decides to switch sides and start supporting the kingdom. So it further erodes the resistance that the kingdom has left and just puts more fire behind the Empire. And so now it's time to start the attack. Chapter 16, Lady of Deceit. So it's time to attack the capital, but that's not what we're doing. Publicly, they've sort of announced to everybody, we're going to Ferdiad, we're going to the capital of the kingdom, we're going to take it. But secretly, they have a different plan. Like, they're going to put that out there, but really we're going to attack this other fortress city in the west called Aryan Road. Aryan Road is like this big fortress, and it's called the Silver Maiden. It's never been taken, it's never been fallen. So they're actually going to march all of the playable characters there, take Aryan Road, and then go from there to attack the kingdom capital from a better vantage. So we go to Aryan Road, and we fight there. Cornelia is there. In this timeline, Cornelia is with the kingdom. She was already working with the kingdom before. Cornelia is running things there, and Cornelia is actually really surprised to see the Empire forces show up. We get some cutscenes with her saying that she's like, this is kind of weird. Like, I think I understand what's going on, but they're attacking me. And you end up taking Aryan Road. You do kill Cornelia. With her dying breath, she's kind of like, okay, like, I'm down to play my part, which is a weird way to die. But they do it. They capture Aryan Road, and things are looking good. They're going to go from there to the capital. They do, all of our main people go back to Garreg Mach when they're approached by Lord Arundel. Arundel is a little miffed that there was this deception going on of, oh, we're going to go to the capital, but we really didn't. We went to Aryan Road instead. And Arundel is kind of giving some sass to Edelgard and Byleth that, like, yeah, don't go around doing stuff without telling me again, or like Garreg Mach could end up like Aryan Road, and walks away whistling, practically. And they're like, what's that about? And no sooner does he leave that Hubert shows up and says, guys, Aryan Road's been destroyed. And they're like, what? And they're like, yeah, a bunch of javelins of light came out of the sky and blew it up. Like, completely blew it up. Like, a third of the forces are gone, dead, unaccounted for. Everything's a shambles. The city's been destroyed. All this happens off screen. We're just told about it. And they're like, dang. I was like, okay, so that's what he meant. So Arundel was mad that we took the city there and he blew it up. Like, clearly that's what happened. All of his, like, dark magic people who he has on his payroll, they blew it up. So, like, I see what's going on. And it kind of reignites the need to win the war and then fight Arundel and his people, because, you know, they understand how bad they are. But that doesn't stop Edelgard from announcing to everybody, oh, the church blew up Aryan Road. It was the church. It wasn't the people on our side. It was the church. Like, you see how bad they are? They wouldn't let us have the fort, so they blew it up. They used some kind of wacky magic and blew it up. So that's the public story that she goes with there. But still, Aryan Road's gone. Things are still clear to go to the capital, and that's the plan next. Chapter 17, Field of Revenge. To go from Garreg Mach to Ferdiad, they're going to go through the Tailteen Plains. And this is a place of historical significance, because if you remember way back at the beginning when there's the cutscene where Seiros was fighting Nemesis, that's where the fight happened. It was on the Tailteen Plains. So they're going to meet up there. Dimitri and Rhea decide that Dimitri really wants to kill Edelgard because, you know, that's his thing. And Rhea really wants to kill Byleth because she still feels betrayed at what went down. And so they decide they're going to go and fight them on the Tailteen Plains. And so you leave Garreg Mach. You have the fight. Dimitri's there leading the forces. A little bit later, Rhea shows up. And Rhea has changed her outfit. And she's changed into the outfit that she was wearing in the cutscene at the beginning when she was Seiros. And she even tells the people, hey, call me Seiros. Go ahead and call me Seiros now. I'm Seiros going forward. Like, it's pretty neat. It's pretty cool. Dedu apparently stole a bunch of crest shards, and, like, people start turning into monsters, like, to help fight back. Dedu himself turns into a big monster, but you beat him. Rhea/Seiros retreats, goes back to Ferdiad, but you're able to bust through and defeat Dimitri. Edelgard kills him, finishes him off. They have a little dialogue before that happens, but Dimitri dies. But now with Dimitri down, the path is clear to go right to the capital. Chapter 18, To the End of a Dream. The attack on Ferdiad goes down. Rhea's holed up in the city with Catherine and Cyril. They know they're coming. You know, Edelgard gives like, hey, we're coming to kill you. Maybe you want to give up now. You know, she's willing to do it. But Rhea isn't having any of it. They're going down swinging, and tells Catherine to light the city on fire. And Catherine's like, there's still people in here. And it's like, I don't care. Light it on fire. We're gonna smoke them out. If they're gonna take us, they're gonna walk through the fire to do it. It's like, okay. So they light the city on fire, and the battle ensues. They go through the streets of Ferdiad. Rhea turns into the big dragon, turns into the Immaculate One, and you have to fight her. And so it comes down to Rhea versus Edelgard and Byleth. They team up using their big relic weapons, the Sword of the Creator, and they do it. They kill Rhea. They like bonk her in the head. She dies. It's Byleth and Edelgard left when Byleth like passes out. Byleth drops right after that happens and seems to die for a second. And then something weird happens. We go into like an X-ray of Byleth's chest. We see inside Byleth's chest. And remember before about how Byleth, when they were a baby, didn't have a heartbeat. We see inside Byleth's chest, you can see Byleth's actual heart, like person heart. And then there's also the crest stone inside their chest with the crest of flames on it. And we see the crest of flames disappear. So it seems like Byleth is dead after that, but after a second, the heart actually starts up, and Byleth comes back. The green hair that they got when they merged with Sothis, that disappears, that goes back to being blue. And so, like, all the extra powers are gone, but Byleth is still alive. And so, yeah, the Empire wins this time. Edelgard is the Emperor, and just sort of dismantles the nobility system, like she said she would. And that's the end. You might be thinking, well, what about those who slither in the dark? What about Lord Arundel and all of them? That happens in a PS. We get the little bit of the wrap up showing like what happened, and it just says like, oh yeah, and they fought the Garthans afterwards. It's just over there. You would think that after all this setup, they might have to fight the Garthans again to like get out from under their thumb. Nope. They just do it after the fact. Killing Rhea and like winning the war, that's just the end of it. And that's it. There's a couple other like endings that you can get with certain characters that show like actually fighting that war, fighting in Shambhala again. But we don't see it, not in the regular game. So yeah, that's Crimson Flower. And you might be wondering, well, what if you picked the Black Eagles to begin with, but you didn't get to go with Edelgard, or you didn't want to go with Edelgard? What happens then? Part 2, Silver Snow. If, when you started the game, you chose the Black Eagle's house, but you either didn't get the support with Edelgard that you needed, or you just didn't side with Edelgard, then you get this fourth route, which is called Silver Snow. So yes, there's 4 different kinds of endings to this game, 4 different second halves to this game. And so now we're going to talk about that route, what's known as the church route, called Silver Snow. Rewind a little bit to when Edelgard revealed herself as the Flame Emperor. Remember, Rhea was like, kill Edelgard, now! If you say, okay, we'll kill Edelgard, then you side with the church. Edelgard is kind of disappointed that you turned on her, and her and Hubert teleport away. You get the battle for Garreg like you do in the other 2 routes, where you're fighting against the invading empire. Rhea turns into the Immaculate One, and Byleth falls down the bottomless pit. Chapter 13, Reunion at Dawn. Byleth wakes up. Byleth goes to Garreg. This time, Edelgard is there, because Edelgard remembers the promise that they made about reuniting 5 years later, and shows up at Garreg to see if it happens, and it does. And this time, you have a sword fight with Edelgard. By the way, in all of the routes, Edelgard stole the Sword of Saros, which is Rhea's sword, the one that she had in the very beginning movie. So she has the Sword of Saros with her, and you do the sword fight, Sword of the Creator versus Sword of Saros. And you just kind of come to a standstill, and Edelgard's like, well, now we're going to have to fight. Bye, and Edelgard leaves. Your students who you had earlier, who were part of the Black Eagles, they still show up as part of like the 5-year reunion plan. They didn't go and join the Empire this time. Since the thing with Rhea didn't happen, they didn't get scared, and since you weren't leading them, they didn't join up. So they have all been like, yeah, Edelgard is crazy now. Like, I don't think we want to get down with her. And so the church folks get to come back, Seth and Flayn, and they're like, well, oh, you're back. Like, this is great. Like, let's try and find Rhea again and like fight back against the Empire, because western half of the kingdom has gone to the Empire, eastern half's fighting against him. The alliance is neutral. Same thing that kind of happens in everyone. But the church isn't necessarily behind anybody this time. Kind of like when you did Verdant Wind. But they're like, hey, this is our opportunity. Let's kind of marshal everybody and we'll try and fight back. Chapter 14, King Without a Kingdom. Again, Sedith and everybody class, they decide like, okay, let's fight under the crest of flames, because like we're not exactly the church without the head of the church, Rhea, so we'll fight under Byleth. And again, the Empire has spies everywhere, so they see that this is happening, and they attack Garreg. They send Randolph again. Randolph dies again, because Randolph always dies. But you get the idea that Okay, the Empire's here. We're going to need reinforcements. Who can we get? Like, let's get Judith. Chapter 15, Valley of Torment. Again, the plan is to get Judith and her reinforcements, and they're going to go to ALL, so you don't need to go through the Alliance territories that are sympathetic to the Empire. All this is very similar to the Verdant Wind route. You go to ALL, but again, there was spies, so
Gwendol
attacks again, you beat them. So you get the reinforcements, but Judith also brings you a letter from Claude, because Claude's intel has led him to discover that Rhea is still alive and she's being held captive in the kingdom capital. So they're like, okay, so we need to go to the capital, so we should get the Great Bridge of Myrddin, and that'll help us get into the Empire. Chapter 16, Rose-Colored River. You go to the Great Bridge of Myrddin, you take it, you fight Ladislava again, you beat her, you take the bridge. So you've secured this kind of passageway into the Empire. But then Gilbert shows up. Again, in this timeline, Dimitri is thought to be dead, but again, in this timeline, he's not actually. And Gilbert says, like, hey, Dimitri's actually alive, and he really wants to kill Eligard. And so, like, thanks for, like, getting the bridge for us here. We're going to go through here, and we're going to attack him. Do you guys want to come with? Sadith and Byleth, like, we just took the bridge. Like, we're exhausted. Like, we don't have the forces to do that. Like, but if you guys want to go, like, go ahead. Like, we're not going to stop you, but, like, maybe we could team up together. And it's like, no, Dimitri's just got to go kill Edelgard, so we're just going to go. So, like, okay, good luck. We're going back to the monastery. Hope it goes well. Chapter 17, The Impregnable Fortress. This might be my favorite thing to happen in any of the timelines right here. Remember, Dimitri's coming through. He's going to attack the Empire. You fall back to Garreg Mach. You get a messenger saying, like, hey, a big giant battle just happened. So remember in the other timelines when there was the battle at Gronder, when all three sides met at Gronder, just like they did for the Battle of Eagle and Lion, and they all fought it out? That still happens, but you're not there for it. It just happens off screen. They're just gone. And like you hear that Dimitri got killed, Claude is missing, and Edelgard was wounded and retreated back. So you just hear about this. It still happens, but you only ever hear about it. Great. But you decide that, like, oh, well, that sucks for all of our would-be allies. Like, that would have been nice to team up together and do this all at once, but no, whatever. But if the Empire is retreating, this is our chance to attack Fort Mercius and get a foothold in the Empire. So they're like, let's go. And so they go to Fort Mercius. I think they do the disguise thing again. They get in, they take the fort, and you fight the Death Knight here in the fort. Again, you don't kill the Death Knight here. The Death Knight escapes. He does the point up in the sky, and the missile comes down again. Again, this is a surprise, and blows up the fort. But again, we took the fort, but the same sort of thing happened, but we have the foothold into Empire territory. Chapter 18, The Chaos of War. The path is clear to Embar, so like, let's go. They march on to the capital city of Embar. Hubert and Death Knight meet you in the streets again. You end up killing them both. The way is clear. Again, though, Dedue shows up again, because he survived the Gronder battle when Dimitri died, and gives you the intel again, and says, this is what's inside the palace. I'm not going to join you, but, good luck. Let's both attack the palace. So it's like, all right, let's go do it. Chapter 19, Conclusion of the Crossing Roads. You attack the palace again. Dedue shows up to help again. I managed to save him on my playthrough this time, which made me very happy. You attack Edelgard. You defeat Edelgard. Once again, she's sort of beaten, but says, I'm not going to stop. You're going to have to kill me. And so Byleth kills Edelgard. The war is over again. Except it still isn't. Again, you get the letter from Hubert, telling you about those who slither in the dark, the Agarthans, telling you where the city is because they figured it out when they launched the missile. And again, you rescue Rhea, and it's like, well, I guess we got to go there to quash this once and for all. Chapter 20, The City Without Light. You go once again to Dubstep City, fight Tullus again, and it plays out much the same way as it did in Verdant Wind. Rhea insists that she wants to go with. She does. When you beat Tullus, he launches the missiles, blows it up. Rhea flies up as the Immaculate One to stop the missiles, is gravely wounded. But the city is destroyed. The Agarthans are beaten. Is it over this time? Chapter 21, Following a Dream. It seems to be over this time. Everybody's been beaten. Everybody goes back to Garreg Mach. Rhea's trying to recover from her injuries, but Seteth decides to tell you, because he doesn't know if Rhea's going to make it, a little bit about your backstory. Seteth comes clean with things that you probably would have figured out already playing the game, but Rhea and him and Flayn are all not exactly human. They're all part of the children of the goddess, the same species where the relics come from. Seteth and Flayn are Saints Keyhole and Sethlene from the mythology. They're some of the saints that fought alongside Saros, and they're like thousands of years old and such. And that Rhea can explain some more of this, but Byleth is also part of this lineage somehow. And Seteth is kind of telling you this because Seteth wants you to take over the church, because it's unclear if Rhea is going to make it or not. But says, like, calm down, you don't have to answer just yet. Let Rhea explain this to you. Rhea recovers enough to meet and explain. And finally, Rhea explains a bit. So, as it turns out, Rhea is Saros. We had learned this along the way. But ever since, like, everybody got killed by Nemesis and by the Ten Elites back in the day, Rhea, Saros, has been trying to bring back the goddess, bring Sothis back to life. Remember back in the DLC in Cindered Shadows, they had tried to resurrect her, but it didn't work. They never stopped trying, apparently, or at least Rhea didn't. And Rhea had the crest stone, the heart of her mother, Sothis, and set about trying to just literally bring her back to life. And the way she did this was by somehow making people, just like making them. And Byleth's mother, Citri, was one of these people. It was, in fact, the 12th attempt at just making a new body for Sothis and putting the crest stone into their body, putting the heart in there so the goddess would come back. Apparently it never worked. Citri was the 12th attempt. This kind of explains some of the details we got in the DLC about Citri never leaving the monastery and being really frail. So there was another part of this equation. Remember, way back, when we were talking about Geralt, and how people would remark that, like, you haven't seemed to have gotten any older, and him talking about how he didn't know how old he was. So, it turns out, way back in the day, Geralt was one of the Knights of Saros, and he was on guard for Rhea at some point, and there was this attack, and Geralt, saved Rhea, but was mortally wounded. And so what Rhea did is gave Geralt an infusion of her blood. Now, if you remember, like when you take blood from one of the goddess people, it has the crests in it, and it can give you powers. And so giving the blood to Geralt made him recover, and also gave him the crest of Saros. So he had the Saros blood in him. That's what made him live so long. There's some dialogue where he says he's at least 100 years old, but again, it's heard secondhand, so it's unclear how old he was. So, as it turned out, the combination of Geralt's Saros-infused blood with the body that was made by Saros/Rhea that contained the heart was kind of the right combination. The baby, Byleth, was still stillborn, and so Rhea had to take the heart out of the Creststone heart, out of Citri, and put it into Byleth for Byleth to survive. But that's why Byleth was seeing Sothis, in their mind. Because that was the combination that worked to bring back. And that's what Rhea was thinking was going to happen when they put Byleth on the throne. That Saros was going to awaken within them, and the goddess would be reborn like she always wanted. So it didn't work exactly that way, but it worked about 50% that way. Whew. So that's a lot to take in. So Byleth is the goddess reborn, sort of. And it's a good thing that Rhea got all this information out now, because right at this moment, presumably because of her injuries, she starts to go crazy. and like she transforms into the Immaculate One. She transforms into the dragon again, but she's just berserk and out of control. And Seth is like, "Dang, this is bad. We got to stop her. There's nothing we can do to calm her down. We just have to kill her." Oh, and it also turns out that apparently a lot of the priests in the church, as part of what they do to become priests, is they get some of the blood of Rhea injected into them, and all those people who got that too are also now turning into monsters. So like everything is going crazy at the monastery. You have to fight all the priests who are now monsters, and you have to fight Rhea as the Immaculate One. And you do, and you beat her. She like flies away and goes like to the big church hall where you go in the monastery, turns back into like human shape, but probably dies. I say probably because apparently this is variable. Like if you have high enough support with Rhea, she will live, but if you don't, she dies. Either way, she is not the head of the church anymore. If she lives, she just retires. And Byleth becomes the new head of the church, and thus all of Fotland. After the war ended, since none of the heads of state are around anymore, the church kind of like expands to fill the power vacuum and sort of takes over. And so that's the end of Silver Snow. So that's it. That's all of the main plot threads in Fire Emblem Three Houses. So I played this game 2.5 times. I played the Golden Deer route, I played Crimson Flower route, and the Silver Snow route because I could play halfway, save, and then restart my save over again, so I didn't have to do a third full playthrough. I didn't do the Blue Lions route myself. I did watch a very good playthrough on YouTube, so I could at least experience it and see what the big difference was. But as you can see, when I went through the first time, I immediately had to say, well, what happens if you're with Edelgard? Like, I couldn't resist to see what the hell was going on, because I know people really were down with Edelgard, and I couldn't see how you get so down with the bad guy. So I just had to see for myself. And that's why I wanted to share this all with you. As you can see, there's some wild stuff going on here. And if you just play through one route, you would have no idea. Like, maybe Silver Snow is the most informative route to go with, but like you're still missing some things. There's still things that get revealed other places. So if you want the whole story, you need to play everything, essentially. And even then, there are still mysteries that are left unsolved as far as I can tell. Remember about Patricia, Dimitri's stepmother, and the fact that she was like in on the attack? What happens to her? We never know. What's the deal with Rhea giving her blood to all those priests at the end? Like, that seems weird and unnecessary. Why does that happen? Why does Rhea turn into the Immaculate One at the end of Silver Snow? Like, why does she go berserk? That doesn't happen anywhere else. In Crimson Flower, why does Byleth turn back into normal when Rhea dies? If Rhea dies in Silver Snow, that doesn't happen. I don't know. There's so many things that are still left unclear and unanswered. In Azure Moon, what happens to the Agarthans? They just don't come up. Like, Dimitri doesn't even know that they exist. You kill Lord Arundel, and so they don't get involved later on, but they're still out there. Like, there's still conflict going on. Oh, by the way, you might not have noticed this because I don't think it's ever dictated 100% clear, but Lord Arundel and Tullus are the same person. You know, this is all subtext. You sort of figure out that the Agarthans have been body snatching people for the past several years. Just like Monica was really Crania, Tomas was really Solon. Those are people who already existed, but some Agarthans like body snatched them and like changed them to look at. The same thing happened to Lord Arundel, who was just a guy, and then he got taken over by Tullus. And it seems that Cornelia is also one of these people, but that's never made clear at all. Like, you never get confirmation of that. It could be just Cornelius is bad, but she's probably one of the Agarthans. So all that's never even explained either. So there's so much going on, and I think that is kind of right in a weird way. You know, because in real life, Like, we never know what everybody's motivations are. We never know what's really all the backstory going on. We see what we see, and we have to go based on that. And in the text of the game, we get a lot of that because Edelgard's whole thing is that. Edelgard's understanding of the situation is somewhat flawed. She has a lot of secret information that people don't know, but she's also missing a bunch of information. And that's not her fault. Like, she knows what she knows and she starts a war based on it, but she's wrong. She's missing a lot of crucial information that if she knew it, she might act differently. She might not align herself with the people who killed all her brothers and sisters and such. I thought that was really fun. I thought that was a great way to tell a story, especially in a video game. And I wanted to share that all with you. And I know many of you may not have the hours to put into this that I did. I thought I'd save you the trouble and talk about that with you here. And by the way, if you are thinking about playing the game, do it. It's still a ton of fun, even if you watched all of this and you want to experience the game. The actual gameplay, the strategic elements, those are all fun. I didn't even get into most of the story. All of the characters have their own little stories and backstories and interplay, and you get little PSs at the end if your character survived, what happened to them. Again, you can marry characters at the end. On my playthroughs, I married Dorothea, Shamir, and Happy. I regret not marrying Mercedes because I've kind of figured out a little too late how awesome she was. But I'll be honest, when I did the Black Eagles route, that timeline was the worst. So I married Shamir instead because I didn't want to spoil Mercedes' future by bringing her into that timeline. But I digress. So yeah, that's what the hell is going on in Fire Emblem Three Houses. I hope you enjoyed your time here. See you later.